All right, welcome everybody. Apologies for the delay. It's that time of the year. Welcome to the Public Safety, Transportation, and Environment Subcommittee of the Budget. We are hearing three budgets today: MDOT State Highway Administration, MDOT Maryland Transit Administration, and Department of the Environment, and we will be going in that order. With us, we have Mr. Steve McCulloch for State Highway. Steve, take it away.
Okay, Madam Chair, members of the committee, you should have a document in front of you entitled State Highway Administration. The fiscal 2024 operating budget increases by $21.6 million or 6.4%. Jump now to the managing for results discussion. The first managing for results looks at traffic fatalities, and you can see from exhibit 1 on page 5 that in calendar 2021, the number of fatalities fell. The vehicle miles traveled also fell by 6 billion miles, and therefore you see the rate decline. However, it's still in 2021 above the maximum fatality rate goal that you see there as the straight line. Managing for results, exhibit 2 looks at the percentage of miles traveled in congested conditions during the evening peak hour. You can see the big drop off that occurred in 2020, and things have been growing as we've all experienced. Traffic is returning to normal. However, in 2022 and 2023, they're still estimated to be slightly lower than pre-pandemic levels. Looking at exhibit 3, on page 7, this looks at the percentage of bridges on the state highway network that have a component rated as poor or worse. And you can see that this metric has steadily declined, and Maryland has one of the best performances on this metric in the nation. Exhibit number 4 on page 8 looks at the percent of highway network in overall preferred maintenance condition. The straight line at the top shows the goal, and you can see that in 2022 they met that goal. They utilized some contractual services to do that after missing it slightly in 2021. Turning now to the agency spending, exhibit 5 on page 9 shows the breakout between the SHA's own personnel versus contractual services. You can see that from this pie chart that in 2024, they'll be spending about $21 million more on its own workforce than the services it obtains through contracts. As I mentioned at the beginning, exhibit 6 on page 10 is the proposed budget. And as I mentioned at the beginning, the operating budget increases by 6.4% or $21.6 million. Of that, approximately $6.3 million relates to the personnel expenses. As in other budgets you've seen, those increases are driven by employee and retiree health, plus the annualization of the 2022 November general salary increase. Scroll down a little bit. The remaining increases you can see grouped at the top of this are all relate to road maintenance and winter maintenance budget, which we will look at next. In 2020, the fiscal 2020 budget, General Assembly stated the intent that MDOT budget its snow removal and winter maintenance expenses at the 5-year actual level of expenditures. The budget in 2024 of $80 million complies with this intent. The 5-year average ending in fiscal 2022 was 79.98, so they're right at that. As of February 2nd of this year, SHA had spent just $21 million of the budgeted amount of 76. So that 5-year average will likely be coming down next year. Turning to personnel detail, page 12, this shows a decrease of 3 positions, regular positions for SHA. As you saw in the Secretary's office, these are the positions that were transferred from SHA to the Secretary's office to provide department-wide support. Discussion of the capital program begins next on page 13. looking at the first item, the SHA budget actually has the state highway, or excuse me, the highway user revenue grants to locals. And Exhibit 7 on page 13 shows the funding from 2022 through the 2024 allowance. You can see that the 2024 budget has an increase of $57.2 million. That's almost a 20% increase. The reason for that large increase is legislation passed last session to increase the percentage of the transportation revenues going to locals. So in 2023, the local share was 13.5%. In 2024, it's going up to 15.6%. That will be the new kind of base level. However, in the next couple of years, the legislation passed last year is giving an enhanced rate. It'll go up to 18% next year, and then 20% for 2 following years before falling back to the 15.6% in 2028. Exhibit 8 shows the distribution of the 2024 highway user grants by county for both the counties and municipalities. Exhibit 9 on page 15 looks at the 6-year funding for SHA. 6-year funding totals $8.1 billion, which is a $1.9 billion increase over last year's 6-year program. A large part of that increase is due to projects enabled by the additional funding available through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or IIJA. Exhibit 10, starting on page 16, lists the projects totaling $979 million in funding for these IIJA enabled projects. Exhibit 11 shows the fiscal 2024 allowance, which is nearly $1.3 billion fiscal 2024. And you can see that the minor program makes up about 3/4 of the capital program for SHA in 2024. So looking at the minor program, since it's such a big share, Exhibit 12 on page 19 breaks out the minor funding by investment category. And you can see here that system preservation is the largest section of the minor program. And Exhibit 13 on page 20 then further breaks out the minor program by project type. And you can see that 2 largest uses in the minor program or programs are resurfacing projects for roads and bridge rehabilitation and replacement. Exhibit 14 on page 21 shows the cash flow for the program from 23 through 24. So in 2023, the state only program, excluding the HUR grants, increased by $26.8 million. System preservation projects, actually increased by more, 37, and that was slightly offset by decreases in the major project funding. Looking at the change between the current year and 2024 allowance, the cash flow increases by $193.1 million. Again, that driven largely by system preservation and minor projects, although there are also increases in major projects and the development and evaluation program. Exhibit 15, which begins on page 22 and goes for several pages. I'm not going to go through each of these, but I've shown this from year to year. Since SHA is such a large capital program, this just gives us an idea of some of the major projects. In order to get on this list, there had to be at least funding of at least $1 million in fiscal 2024 allowance, or $5 million over the 6-year CTP. So that's there for your reference to look at. On page 30, discussion of the first-year funding that we've done for each mode. As you have heard several times now, legislation passed last year requires first-year funding for construction and design to be identified in the CTP. For SHA, Exhibit 16 on page 31 shows that only $4 million of its large capital program is first-year funding. This kind of illustrates that the fact that many of the programs and projects in SHA are multi-year. And so even though there's a large increase, most of those projects have had some funding for design in prior years, and much of the capital, the construction funding are in out years beyond the 2024 budget. Exhibit 17 on page 32 shows the few projects that make up that $4 million. Exhibit 18 on page 33 shows the significant changes from last year's CTP. And again, those are many of the projects that we've seen in these other exhibits. Turning now to the discussion of the issues. The first issue is a discussion of the alternative fuel corridors that will be receiving new federal electric vehicle charging infrastructure funds. The Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act of 2015, or FAST Act, required the Federal Highway Administration to designate national alternative corridors, and the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Formula Program, or NEVI, which was included in IIJA, provides both formula funding and discretionary funding to help fund infrastructure in these corridors. Exhibit 19 on page 36 shows Maryland's identified corridors in this, and you can see that it's quite extensive. The Maryland's designated corridors include include all alternative fuel types. So it's not just electric. There's also liquefied natural gas, compressed natural gas, and petroleum CNG, compressed natural gas types of funding. The IIJA does provide $5 billion over 5 years for infrastructure funding along these corridors. Maryland is set to receive through the formula program about $57.5 million between fiscal 2023 and 2027. Although the funds will flow through SHA, the investment strategies and decisions will be made with input from the Maryland Energy Administration. And SHA does expect that the majority of this funding will actually be awarded to private entities, which will be building out the installation of these charging facilities. We've asked MDOT to comment on whether additional corridors are being considered for inclusion, and what criteria will be used to distribute that formula funding that has been identified. Turning now to issue number 2, this is a discussion of the highway traffic incident response patrol coverage and whether it should be expanded. With the exception of I-65, this SHA's CHART program, which is the Coordinated Highway Auto Response Traffic System, I may have Coordinated Highway Action Response Team. These are the part of this CHART system includes the patrols that you see around the central Maryland, and you see the corridors that it covers that respond to traffic incidents. They include both patrols to assist disabled vehicles that may be on the shoulder. When there are accidents, there's the signage, the trucks that pull up with the signs, the directing traffic that closes lanes, and so forth. This CHART program, as I said, it covers all of the interstates except for I-68 and all of the Maryland, the central Maryland major roadways, as you see from the map. The SHA has contracted with University of Maryland for many, many years to do a cost benefit or evaluation program evaluation of the CHART program. And the exhibit 21 on page 38 shows nearly $1.8 billion direct benefit of mostly due to delays, reduction of delays, traffic delays, people not sitting in delays that otherwise would have occurred had the CHART operations not been in effect. And this same performance evaluation has recommended for many years that additional resources, could they be identified, would allow an extension of the CHART system into unserved areas. with Western Maryland being identified as the kind of highest cost benefit for that expansion. I did ask SHA, to give me some estimates as to how that would work if they were to expand the system, and they came up with a phased approach for Western Maryland. Phase 1 would establish coverage during the week from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 5 a.m., 9 p.m. And then phase 2 would extend that patrols to weekends. The cost of doing this for phase 1 would be estimated in the first year of $3.2 million because there are a lot of startup. That includes vehicles. There are new positions that would be required. After the first year, annual operating costs for phase 1 would total $1.6 million. Phase 2 would have an additional 5 vehicles and 5 positions for a first year cost of $1.4 million and ongoing costs of $642,000. SHA also notes that expanding to Eastern Shore, Lower Eastern Shore would have a similar, it was basically the same phasing and costs assumed for that as well. So we've asked MDOT to comment on the options it has to cover the costs of expanding CHART. The current system is largely paid for from federal funds, and there is maybe some opportunity to expand that. But if not, the cost benefits. What are the options for doing that? Issue number 3 that's shown on page 39 is the same issue that was covered in the overview. There's nothing new to report on that. It's just here so that people who look for this project in the future might think to look in SHA and not the overview. Recommended actions are on page 40. The recommendations for both the operating and the capital are to concur with the governor's allowance.
Thank you, Steve. Questions for our analyst? Senator Rosebud.
Yeah, page 12, you have the personnel data and shows the vacancy rate. I didn't see any breakdown of what the vacancies are in.
No, and that data is not readily available. We've asked, the way it's reported, we get that are used for that exhibit, just the kind of gross numbers.
Okay, so I'll ask the department. The other one was, I'm obviously out of touch with reality. I don't recall ever having heard of the alternative fuel corridors. I sort of missed the big picture here.
Sure. So
kind of the short version of what are we trying to do here?
Okay. So the alternative fuel corridors actually this began again with the FAST Act in 2015. There have been 6 rounds since then where states would identify corridors to be alternatives. So this includes electric, liquefied natural gas, compressed natural gas. The idea being, right now, if you have an internal combustion engine, you can drive wherever you want.
Right.
There are gas stations everywhere.
Right.
But if we really want to incentivize people to buy alternative fuel vehicles, there needs to be the infrastructure so that people are.
So these are about recharging and refueling.
So they are. So that's what the corridors, they're identified either as corridor ready, which means there is sufficient infrastructure, for example, on the electric vehicle corridors, that you could have an electric vehicle and drive those corridors with reasonable expectation that you would
Gotcha.
have charging when you need it. The current standard is they want every 50 miles along these corridors within 1 mile of the road, there should be an electric vehicle charging opportunity. Some of the other fuel types were probably more geared towards the trucking industry.
Gotcha.
They may not, electric vehicles may not be cost effective for them because it's such big batteries, but they might be using liquefied petroleum or compressed natural gas. The same thing applies. In order for that transition to occur, they need these corridors. So that's why the Federal Highway Administration started, requesting states identify these. It's the states that submit the proposals to the feds, and then they approve them. Now, the NEVI funding that came with the IIJA, the states are required to have an approved plan in order to spend the money.
And we have one, right?
We do. Maryland was one of the first 35 states that had their plans approved last September.
So where are we from vision to reality? Is it, we're like right at the beginning of this essentially?
Well, the corridors, again, for the last 6 years, they've been, identifying more and more. The ICC was, I think, in the most recent round was the last corridor to be identified in the Maryland plan. And as you can see from the map, this is the electric vehicle one.
You're right.
So the dotted lines are the corridor pending, which means there's not sufficient infrastructure there, the charging stations. That's where, the opportunity is to build those out.
But so corridor ready means one and done.
Means that there's sufficient now, at least 50, but obviously as more people adopt electric vehicles, probably the need to
grows
more than the minimum required.
Gotcha. Okay, all right, thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Selling.
I want to just follow up on that because I see that there's a timeline for the finances, which is 57.5 from 23 to 27. But I understand his questions, but do we have some type of a timeline that we're going to make sure that the others are there, or we're just going to go like with the flow, like, okay, we need more in this area, or there's areas that we already know, but there's a timeline for that?
Well, and that's why, requested the department to indicate where they think this is going. And
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, we're going to welcome up our now not acting anymore, full secretary, Mr. Wiedefeld, along with Tim Smith, the administrator of SHA. Gentlemen, welcome. And I know you listen intently to the questions, so if you wouldn't mind answering them in your opening, we'd appreciate that as well. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, Paul Wiedefeld, Secretary of the Maryland Department of Transportation. With me today is Tim Smith, Administrator of the Maryland State Highway Administration. I'd like to thank Steve again for his thorough analysis and review and working with us on some of these issues. Our state highway team works diligently to keep the nation's supply chain moving, our construction efforts on track, and our roadway infrastructure in a state of good repair, all while planning and designing the next phases of projects that will connect our customers to life's opportunities. State Highway accomplishes this by keeping the safety for our customers and our employees at the forefront of their decisions and utilizing technology to improve their efficiency. We're very fortunate for much needed infusion of federal funding from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. It allows us to move forward with projects to better protect our vulnerable users, to harness technology to implement congestion relief solutions, and to maintain our critical infrastructure in good condition. We're looking to the future with a focus on preserving what we have, planning for the future, and building what we can to further support improving life in Maryland. We're committed to delivering projects of all sizes that help all customers get safely to their destinations. I'll now turn it to Tim to review some short comments on his program and then answer the questions. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Secretary. Good afternoon, Chair Elfreth and the rest of the committee. For the record, Tim Smith, SHA Administrator. I'm often coming to these budget hearings in the middle of February trying to explain, highlight some of our winter events and give some kudos to some of our staff. I'm very happy with the 70-degree weather we had yesterday. So I'm not complaining about that at all. I'm happy to have those warm temps. But while we've been kind of spared from maybe the more frigid temperatures this year, it has not necessarily spared us from major weather events. So the frequency and intensity of the heavy rains we've seen over the past year has put a strain on our aging infrastructure. And when I'm saying aging infrastructure, I'm thinking the infrastructure that you cannot necessarily see while you're driving. It's the ones buried underneath our roadways, our drainage systems. So last year we faced several challenges with some failed piping and drainage systems. One I'll highlight a couple of them. One is on I-270 on southbound there in Gaithersburg. Another one on I-97 near the Baltimore Beltway. And another one is right here in Annapolis. We discovered one on US 50 near 97. So we anticipate these type of weather patterns as well coming in the future, but we're going to take a proactive approach to plan on addressing and upgrading our drainage infrastructure and improving our resiliency overall. We have a solid track record, as Steve McCullough kind of mentioned, with our bridges and pavement, and we want to take and duplicate that same kind of measures with our drainage systems. So probably last stop, I'll talk about snow, but while we might not have had snow piled up on our roadways this past year, we have had litter, trash, debris, and instead. So that problem has gotten worse over the past few years, and we've consistently heard feedback from this committee and as well as our elected officials and as well as our communities. And while there are many reasons for the current litter situation, they're really just excuses, and we must find a better way to improve that. So therefore, immediately, we're increasing our litter removal cycles with something that we're pushing out called Operation Clean Sweep Maryland. Some of those efforts have already begun. Hopefully you've seen that on your travels over the past couple of days. This is a renewed emphasis, and we're basically nearly doubling our litter removal cycles to increase, and also increasing our mowing cycles throughout the year. So typically we kind of take a break during winter. We're going to continue through when we're not addressing winter. So beyond routine maintenance, our highway network is more than just moving vehicles. It's about moving people through a roadway system. It's about, the Secretary mentioned, connecting people to life's opportunities. So to fulfill that mission, they must arrive at those destinations safely, right? So it was mentioned in the report in 2021, where there was 563 fatalities on Maryland roadways. And in fact, since 2019, there have been over 550 pedestrian and bicycle fatalities that have accounted for roughly 25% of our fatalities across all of Maryland. So to achieve that Vision Zero goal, we must work collaboratively to prioritize both safety, land use, community livability in the planning and design phases with our metropolitan planning organizations as we look at our next transportation infrastructure projects. So that prep work allows State Highway to kind of transport or implement those spot and corridor improvements, because we really want to protect both our vulnerable users as well as our motorists on our roadways. So that improved safety comes with the proper balance between compromise with vehicle mobility and safety. They don't always work both concurrently. So pivoting to congestion on that topic, our focus is making advancements to using intelligent transportation systems to move motorists from point A to B using our existing footprint. So to do so, we're looking at Maryland's transportation network as a whole, like a system of systems. It can't be just one roadway, one location. So regardless of the travel mode, our roadways play a major part in connecting customers to their next destination or opportunity. So we're currently deploying innovative strategies using technology and actively managing the myriad of roadway systems. You can see several of those right now. We have several adaptive signals across the state on US 1, Maryland 24, and a couple of those locations. You'll see, in addition to the ramp metering on I-270, you'll see more solutions coming online over the next couple of years, one of them being the big one on the Baltimore Beltway. And you couple that with the Steve mentioned before, our traffic incident management tactics, we could really provide a great value in terms of user delay for our users. So we're striving every day to improve our roadway system, and for now and in the future. And to deliver that program, we really need a diverse professional team to implement those innovative solutions to deliver our mission for our customers. So I'm very proud of what our team has accomplished, but also know we're very much looking forward to improved performance in multiple different areas. I also want to echo and thank Steve for keeping us honest and looking at things. So I'm going to kind of step through some of the issues and hopefully answer some of the questions along the way. So related to the national electric vehicle infrastructure. So as was mentioned, it's directly linked to that alternate fuel corridors. And what our plan is, and so right now we have 23 of those corridors, and what we're planning to do is trying to focus on building those out fully before we start looking out and to the question asked, are we expanding that? We're going to finish the existing corridors, the pending ones, because some of the challenges there is federal guidelines have changed from a 5-mile radius to a 1-mile radius. So there is some additional work that needs to be done on existing corridors. So once those main arteries are completed, we can look to expansion into other corridors, but more importantly to the communities to get you to that last mile. So building in the communities will require collaboration and coordination with stakeholders, as was mentioned, the Maryland Energy Administration, as well as Federal Highway. So the criteria we plan on using for those potential applicants for NEVI funding is kind of under development, and that's what we're focusing on for our future procurements. So, but built into that will be the minimum standards required from us from Federal Highway, as well as suggested criteria that we've gathered through public outreach surveys. We've gathered some information from stakeholders, as well as public webinars, as well as a request for information gathering process. So as we shift from corridors to communities, it will always include a critical component of equity, accessibility, and there's a big component in terms of amenities at each of these locations, and that we have to be careful in how we use our right of way in terms of that perspective, and of course, mobility. With regard to the chart expansion issue, I think it was well documented, but our chart program provides great benefit to the users of Maryland. Our state is actually a national leader when it comes to traffic incident management. That's those active patrols you see across the state. As was mentioned, also University of Maryland provides a great resource for us in terms of kind of documenting some of that benefit. One anecdote there that I like to throw out there is for every dollar we typically invest in the chart program, it results in $35 worth of user savings to our customers. So that's a big return on investment. So as part of the kind of overall workforce conversation, I'll be discussing and we'll be discussing with the secretary several different types of staffing resources for us to meet our mission and improve our performance. Obviously, the potential to expand our chart program to western and eastern parts of our state would be part of that discussion. But that discussion also needs to be in terms of our workforce and making sure we have a proper skill sets required to maintain that high return on investment in addition to the budget. And I know the ops lanes issue was moved over to the state highway, but as was mentioned before, this project is viewed under the same lens of social equity, environmental protection, local participation as all transportation projects should. MDOT will continue to work with our partners, including local stakeholders, toward a solution for congestion in the Washington suburbs along 495 as well as 270, as well as addressing maintenance and safety of the American Legion Bridge in a way that meets the needs for all Marylanders. I'm going to address just the recommended actions. Obviously for the operations budget and our pay-go, we agree and concur. Hopefully, I thank you for your patience. I think I might have answered your questions, and if not, I'd be happy to answer any other questions you might have.
Yeah, for the, I got a couple things.
Sure.
The one thing was about when we talked about the, put that down.
As far as the schedule?
Yes, as far as the schedule, I apologize. Yeah, because I have three things here, but the one thing is.
Yeah, so we're using that, the bipartisan infrastructure law, that window from 23 to 27, that's what we're looking to build out. And some of that those initial procurements will help us dictate our pace of play. But what we're, like I said, we're initially focused on those initial procurements of making sure we fully build out our existing corridors and like I said, meet the current criteria. Like I said, it's shift in terms of lane miles. But right now we're focusing on that fiscal year 23 to 27 window to roll this all out.
And always making sure those federal funds are important and we use those federal funds because they're available. We found out that at times we haven't done that. So we just want to make sure we do that. It's available to us. We need to do that. But another thing, I want to thank you for bringing up the chart. And that's big. I personally appreciate what they do out here and protecting our people that are stranded or our police officers or just the towing or anything like that. I see them out everywhere. And I'm glad they're expanding because they're very important. And to me, it's a very big safety thing. It's a safety factor in our main highways. So I'm going to thank you for doing that and for expanding that. And if there's other areas, I know there was like, I would say 68, Highway 68 was one of the areas that were not doing that. Is there a reason why?
We originally have expanded in kind of phased approaches. It becomes more of a manpower resource because, as I mentioned before, with the resources I have, I can decide whether I'm going to fully I try to tackle some of our litter and debris issues or pivot and address incident management. But to your point, we respond to about 35,000 disabled motorists every year now with our current footprint, and know if we have the resources to be able to expand, we will be able to help further motorists as well.
One more thing, if I could, I see the phases that you have in place for making sure that we have the 11 vehicles, the 13 new personnel. Also, the second, it was the 5 vehicles and the 5 additional personnel. And our biggest problem has been people, just getting good people, good maintenance. Do you have a plan? And is there something in place that maybe we could help that out? Because we're concerned about, the administration and we've seen it everywhere, nurses, truck drivers, they all need help out there. How can we help that out in some way?
Well, some of the challenges we have with just our frontline staff is typically these type of folks, as well as our facility maintenance technicians and our maintenance staff that are helping with litter. It's helpful for them and the type of equipment we're using to have a commercial driver's license, right? So get a CDL. The opportunities we provide for them now is we don't necessarily have a recruiting issue. We might sometimes have a retention issue in that we bring folks on board. We get them trained on different pieces of equipment, get their CDL, and then there's other opportunities outside of state government and outside of state highway that are more lucrative. So any opportunities we can to make sure we're not asking to be greater than the private sector, but if we're within, competitive distance from them, we can create an environment where we're creating an environment where they can learn, operate, and then do good things for the state of Maryland.
I know it's a problem. We try to keep our people and that they're finding other opportunities and our federal people's taking our good people. So I know we need to fight, but thank you so much. Thank you.
Senator Jackson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. A couple of questions for you. First of all, let me thank you for Operation Clean Sweep. Coming from the law enforcement world, I think I've heard that one before, but I do appreciate that.
I was worried you were going to go the Karate Kid on that. We're not sweeping a leg. So,
but also with that, so funding for that, when you made the shift to address the concerns that we have, and knock on wood regarding the weather, funding for that particular project or that program, and your overall maintenance dollars, for your winterization and everything else you're doing, do those dollars revert and you can use those dollars to work on programs such as this?
So winter is separate from our operating program. So dollars we don't use ends up being the gentleman to my left's decision on how we handle anything that's left over from unexpended winter expenditures.
Okay, so speak to us
That's
quickly
it.
how you came up with the concept. You're talking doubling up your efforts on both mowing and trash pickup.
Correct.
And concepts are terrific, but there's still a funding mechanism
Right.
that has to be identified.
Sure. I think obviously we had a very mild winter so far. So going forward, yes, we got to figure that out. I think within the current budget, we can handle given some of the, some of the lower costs we've had across the whole system for a milder winter.
All right. Thank you very much,
Mhm.
Madam Chair, if I might. So when we talk about congestion in the areas, so the synchronization, I think we talked about that. We've constantly talked about synchronization of lights. So if you talk about the 301 corridor and other corridors, there's multiple lights. The decisions that your office has to make, your engineers have to make on the distance between intersections and lights and synchronization. And so how often are those assessed, as well as you go forward? I'm sorry, answer that one. I have another one. Sorry.
So with that, we're constantly looking at our existing signal systems. Now we're trying to upgrade it in that in some cases we still have to go out and physically touch a cabinet or touch a signal. We're trying to get it to a point where we're able from our state operations center actively control our traffic signals. So we're not there yet, but that's a direction we're moving into, just using those intelligent transportation systems. But that's back to kind of just our remarks. It's all about kind of looking with our metropolitan planning organizations and local land use to make sure we're making wise decisions, in the sense that as I'm looking at things of protecting a vulnerable user at a particular location, that's not always going to be congruent with getting as much throughput from a vehicle standpoint. So as we can look at that, if we can look at opportunities where we're looking at corridors that are more mobility based on vehicles, and look at other corridors that are maybe more vulnerable user based, I think that helps us from a planning as well as design standpoint. But to your point on like 301, we can obviously, if we look at the entire corridor and come up with opportunities, but then it's also looking at other geometric improvements in addition to just ITS or intelligent transportation systems that we can do. So sometimes there's a combination of both hardcore civil engineering geometric improvements as well as kind of intelligent transportation systems.
And I represent multiple counties, so District 3 and 5 are me, and they're very responsive, by the way, just so you know. And lastly, Madam Chair, when we look at the radius of your shops, placements of the shops, how often do you assess how effective they are with the growth that we have in all of our counties? That radius grows longer. And particularly during the winter months where it gets darker, quicker, earlier, and the response time for folks in these shops. So how often do you assess the radius of your shops?
So previously I was chief engineer, and that was one thing I kind of looked at. It was what the level of responsibility for each shop, and their workload. So it's not necessarily, in my perspective, the number of lane miles added. It's more the density, the population density, as well as back to just that planning part of what type of things, because you can have one lane mile in a very rural area versus one lane mile in a very urban densified, urban core area. And those are two different animals to kind of tackle. So we've been looking, I've been focusing more on our customer care management system, or how much feedback we've been getting from customers. And Andre Fertrell, our chief operating officer, and I have been looking at, are there opportunities that we need to maybe adjust staffing and augment that differently depending on individual shops. We're relatively comfortable with the lane miles assessed, but not every lane mile is the same. And that's kind of what we're looking at now.
More workload assessment. So let's partner, please.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I want to come back to the corridor program. How is the money spent? What is the money spent on?
Previous money was spent on looking at opportunities from both an emergency response as well as an evacuation standpoint on if you had alternate fuel vehicles, how would we move them? And that's how those corridors. So it's mainly our interstates right now. There's some US routes and a few Maryland routes. But money spent moving forward is putting the electric vehicle infrastructure in place. That's kind of what I was mentioning is we're looking at opportunities on where we can do that on our state right away, which we're limited with currently the way the federal government is looking at that. So we're looking at opportunities where we can partner with the private sector, where we can have some of the amenities that are required. So what's required now is any place where you have a fast charging electric vehicle infrastructure is to have restroom facilities as well as amenities in terms of food. It's supposed to be, if you're going to be charging for a little bit, you want to have an opportunity to take a break there and not just run into a gas station and leave. So we don't necessarily have those available currently on our state right away available. Does that make sense?
It makes sense conceptually, but I'm trying to understand what you spend money on. So are we building charging stations? I'm not clear.
That's some of the procurement requirements we're trying to develop, but ultimately what we're going to, whether the state owns it or a private entity owns it, that's some of the logistics and legalities we're trying to get through at this point. But in the end, the dollars will be spent putting in electric vehicle infrastructure that folks can then use.
For charging.
Correct.
And none of that has happened yet.
Correct.
We're all in the planning stage of that.
Well, individual private entities have put charging stations. You'll see those at the convenience stores, but there hasn't been any state funded or federally funded infrastructure.
That answers the question. Back to the vacancies.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a breakdown of where your vacancies are?
Yeah, I've crunched some numbers. I'm a stat guy. So we have a little over 300 total vacancies in state highway, and probably 60 to 70% of those fall into two different categories. One being our frontline staff, like our facility maintenance technicians, and one doing our litter, our drainage, and those type of things. And roughly same half of that 70% are our engineers, meaning folks doing planning, design, and doing construction inspection, those type of things.
So most of them are in maintenance, and the rest of them are mostly in white collar planning design.
Correct.
That's what it describes.
Yeah. So roughly, if you look at our organization, we're roughly 3,000 people organization. Roughly almost half of ours are frontline staff that are out there. So that is a large percentage of our vacancies.
And you talked about, you say recruitment is not that much a problem. It's more retention. I think
Correct.
that's what you said.
Particularly in the frontline employees. because again, a lot of them, I've just in some of the places I've been to, we're training them and then basically they pick up the skills and then they can go make more money somewhere else.
Become more marketable.
And the skill is the major skill is CDL.
CDL and heavy equipment, things of that sort that they can then use
And so that comes down to fundamentally a compensation issue.
fundamentally.
So where are we dealing with the compensation issue with the changes that have been made over the last couple of months?
We've increased them, but again, we have to see how that plays out a little bit over time. But historically, I think that's what driven some of the numbers.
And then just specifically focused on state highway, we're looking at opportunities within our shops to kind of modernize our organizational structure, because really they haven't been looked at since probably the 70s. And in some cases, staff have to pick a choice of, do I stay as a frontline staff and have opportunities at that level with overtime, or do I move into management and have less opportunities with overtime with that? So we're looking at, like I said, our chief operating officer and I, Andre Fercel, are looking at ways we can smooth out that career path and provide people greater opportunities. And that's on the docket to talk to the secretary about.
That's smart. And then you do control your own classification structure, right? I think other departments say they're jealous of you. So you can make those changes on your own.
Mm-hmm.
Where does that fit into the?
Well, I think, and it's interesting, I'm just talking to Holly, the administrator of the MTA. A lot of the people that come into the MTA come in as bus operators, and then they end up as supervisors. But when we recruit, we're not recruiting necessarily for managers. We're recruiting for bus operators. So we need to think about how we recruit people, knowing that that is the career path that some of them may take. And it's the same issue. It becomes an overtime versus a salary issue. It becomes a work hour issue. They have to make decisions on. So we need to think, further down in someone's career when we're recruiting,
That makes sense.
to line this up, to get some of those numbers down. So it's, some of this is, money, clearly, but a lot of it's just like Tim just said, a lot of this has been in place since 1971, and the world's changed, particularly the last few years, and we've got to start to adjust much quicker.
You won't be surprised that I'm saying this, that it sounds like it does fit into the apprenticeship structure.
I'm
that
shocked.
You guys are looking at in your work group. So I seriously hope so. When
No, I
your work
understand.
group comes out at the end of June, I hope these issues are integrated into that apprenticeship analysis.
We're looking at opportunities to include the apprenticeship
Great.
program.
Thank you.
Wouldn't be a B&T hearing if we didn't hear the word apprenticeship. So thank you, Senator. A couple more questions. Thank you for meeting with me earlier this week to talk about all of this, but particularly vacancy rates and particularly the pressures that you experience with contract work and because of that vacancy rate. And appreciate your strategic approach to converting some of those contract workers back in-house. I think that's going to save the state money and certainly increase our quality of life across the board. Senator Jackson, we had a good conversation about tree trimming in our agricultural areas for our farmers. So I appreciate that. And appreciate a renewed approach to constituent services, particularly as it relates to the legislature. So thank you for that. Where would you like your vacancy rate to be here this time next year when we meet again?
So currently we're between 11 and 12%. I think just within current opportunities where we've centralized a lot of our recruitments, as well as we're looking at opportunities in terms of apprenticeships, but also internships. I think we could easily get to 8% within just our existing means.
Okay.
If we have opportunities in terms of modernizing our organization, and if there's other salary opportunities, I think we could absolutely support Governor Moore's approach of cutting our hours in half. We're just going to need a little bit of help to get from 8 to the 5.5.
Okay, we appreciate that.
So I'm hoping you're working with our local and our counties, because Baltimore County has put some in park and rides in some of the charging stations. And it's benefited them, and I'm sure it's benefited some of their vehicles, Baltimore County vehicles, local vehicles. Are you also looking into the counties and seeing possibly where they are for the park and rides, and maybe we can do the same thing? Thank you.
We're looking at that overall, but we're also looking at, there's two different phases here. There's just our fleet that we want to move over to electric, that we need to strategically do that. And then there's what we're trying to build with the overall electric vehicle infrastructure. And part of that is just the whole process of charging in terms of dollars, not charging in terms of electric, how that is handled. So there's some tricky navigating we have to do there because we don't necessarily want the state to be involved in that process. So that's where we're looking at whether there's private opportunities to kind of partner with our stakeholders there.
I'd like to stay in touch, particularly around the EV infrastructure and the federal funds coming in. So if it's takes budget language, or we can just be a little more close on planning and spending, I think the subcommittee would appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Seeing no further questions, thank you very much. Mr. Secretary, you're welcome to stay there, or musical chairs, however you'd like. Thank you, Steve. Okay, next we have Maryland Transit Administration. Carrie Cook is our analyst. Carrie, whenever you're ready. And just a reminder to the committee, we did start late. We have 2 more budgets, so consolidated questions would be appreciated. Thank you. That's what happens when I'm in a rush. I apologize. Before you sit down, we have 2 witnesses
No apologies.
on State Highway. We have with us Mr. John Corrin, who's my constituent. I can't believe I forgot you, John. Please come up. And Mr. Patrick Wojcihan as well. So we're going to follow committee structure, which is 2.5 minutes per witness, please. Thank you.
Sure.
All right. Good afternoon. So my name is Patrick Wojcihan. I'm the mayor of the city of College Park. Most of you know me as that. I'm also here serving as Director of Government Relations at Rails Trails Conservancy. And I would just want to hit on some highlights. I submitted written testimony on behalf of a number of different active transportation organizations that work around the state on these issues. I wanted to highlight the opportunities that we have here with the State Highway Administration for really rethinking how we do transportation in the state. And just to give you a sense of what the need is, I submitted together with my testimony a document that compiles active transportation plans from around the state. And you can see the great demand. I think at every one of your districts, there is a plan in place that needs funding for active transportation, biking and walking, and safe and connected opportunities. So I want to hit some of the highlights of the written testimony and how that's playing out locally, especially for us in College Park. Because we are looking for the State Highway Administration to really prioritize, give a greater level of priority to biking and walking, given this high demand that we're seeing all over the state. Some ways that could be done is to make the bicyclist and pedestrian coordinator and assistant administrator within the administration to explore the possibility of creating an active transportation administration within MDOT, and at minimum hiring somebody who could be an overall active transportation coordinator. One of the challenges that we face in College Park is that there are a lot of different agencies on all levels of government, even up to the federal government with the National Park Service that have a role in planning active transportation. It makes it very difficult, very challenging to plan out active transportation infrastructure as a whole that is connected to the places where our residents need to go every day. So having somebody who is higher up in the administration can work to bring all these various parties together would be incredibly helpful. Additional resources, we do support and are excited about the additional funding for the sidewalks program, the bicycle retrofit program. I understand there are some cuts in the ADA retrofit program, so I'm concerned about that, just making sure that we make sure that all of our infrastructure is accessible for people with disabilities. And one thing I really want to highlight, so that we've had a lot of challenges with the Transportation Alternatives Program and making sure that those funds go out to local governments. The average annual appropriation rate is 90%. There's 5% available in the infrastructure bill that passed out of Congress last year that can be used for technical assistance. And we really like to see the State Highway Administration develop a plan to put those 5% to use to help local governments access those funds and better administer those funds. Thank you very much.
Last committee, I was advised, don't touch the button. Is that true here? Don't touch the button. My name is John Corrin. I'm president of Bicycle Advocates for Annapolis and Anne Arundel County. I also served on the Bicycle Safety Task Force created by this legislature in 2017. In order to relieve traffic congestion, protect our environment, promote health and safety, and provide affordable and equitable transportation choices for Marylanders, the very, very best way to do that is to provide a shift in mode, is to try to get people out of their motor vehicles, walking, biking, or using transit to get to where they have to get to. But they're not going to do it unless they feel safe. And their safety decision is only as good as the least safe segment between their origin and destination. And that means traversing local roads, county roads, state roads. We would like to see the allocation of budget aligned to recognize the importance of that shift. Turn the dial a little bit away from capacity and towards safety. And in particular, as Tim mentioned, safety, especially for the most vulnerable road users, people on foot and bike. We'd like to see this shift from motorized travel to active transportation, human-powered travel. We'd like to see the project life cycle compressed. We work very, very well with SHA, but the projects simply take too long. And that inhibits our ability to deliver the benefit of improvements to the public. And also it inhibits our ability to go get the next round of federal funding, especially now with IIJ and loads, JA, and all types of new federal projects on board. So we would also like to see SHA have additional resource to work with localities, counties, and cities to both execute grant-funded projects quicker and to also secure more federal funding so that we can get more of that money into Maryland. We believe a little bit of spending at the state can bring tens of millions more of federal funding into Maryland. So thank you.
Thank you to you both, and committee, we have their written testimony and we'll certainly take it into consideration as we craft this budget. Thank you both for your time.
Thank you very much.
All right, Carrie, now you're up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, Carrie Cook with the Department of Legislative Services, presenting the budget for the Maryland Transit Administration. So as you can see on page 1 here, the fiscal 2024 budget increases 52.8 million or 5.3% to 1.04 billion. I did just want to highlight for the committee that there is federal COVID-19 stimulus and relief funding, which has mainly served as revenue replacement. They are receiving some of that funding in 2024, but it is definitely continuing to taper off, not as much as it was in fiscal 2023 or 2022. And the PAYGO summary on page 2, fiscal 2024 PAYGO capital budget decreases 25.7 million or 3.5% to 717.9 million. I'm just going to move right into the managing for results and the COVID impact. So exhibit 1 on page 5, these two graphs show monthly ridership for each of the MTA modes. Core bus is grouped here with MTA total because core or local bus, as you might hear it called, is the largest share of MTA ridership. So you can see the monthly data here when it took this tank during the pandemic and the recovery, how the recovery differs between the modes. And also on the second graph here, I just wanted to draw your attention to the mobility paratransit, which is that orange line. So you can see while they have fewer customers from the beginning, their decline and their recovery has been a lot more steady than the other modes. You can see many of them are struggling to recover, while mobility is pretty comparable to their pre-pandemic levels. So moving on to exhibit 2 on page 6. This is change in boardings by mode from the previous year. So the change, fiscal 2022 change compared to fiscal 2021. You can see all of them increased with the exception of taxi access, which is usually grouped with mobility anyway. MARC in particular had quite a substantial increase from the previous year. So they are getting closer to their pre-pandemic levels, but they are still just 25% of their 2019 levels in fiscal 2022. Exhibit 3 on page 7 shows the calendar 2022 average as compared to 2019. So this is a good measure of how close we are by mode to the pre-pandemic levels. So you can see here that, as I mentioned earlier, mobility and core or local bus are the closest to their pre-pandemic levels. Commuter bus and metro in particular are not quite there, under a third of 2019 levels. And then the MTA total is 57% of 2019 levels. I did also want to note here that MTA has not considered scaling back the frequency of any of these transit routes, despite the ridership still not moving in the right direction, but still not quite getting towards those 2019 levels, just citing the benefits of transit, as our public testifier noted, beyond just the ridership alone. I also wanted to briefly discuss here the on-time performance. This is Exhibit 4 on page 8. So this shows you by mode the percentage of service that was provided on time. Now, these thresholds are determined by the agency and they do differ per mode, as do the goals. As you can see here, the goal for bus is just around 80% of on time, where the other goals are higher. Generally, the threshold to be considered on time is within about 10 minutes of the scheduled stop. However, for mobility, as I'll discuss later, that threshold is quite a bit wider. The fare box recovery, which is Exhibit 5 on page 9, this shows the percentage of operating costs that are covered by paying passengers. So going into this is both obviously the number of paying passengers and the cost it takes to operate the service regardless. So you can see here that a couple of the modes did experience a recovery in this in 2022, in particular MARC, but they are still substantially below that 5-year 2018 to 2022 average, which is denoted by the black line there. Exhibit 6 on page 10 shows transit performance measures. So on page 10 and 11, so these are indicators that MTA is required to report to the Federal Transit Administration, and these are showing just some efficiency measures of the system. So passengers per revenue mile, we want that to be high because that means this system is efficient, moving a lot of passengers per mile. Operating cost per passenger trip, this is the cost per person that they are moving, which we want that to be low. And then similarly, operating cost per revenue mile, how much it costs to move the vehicles each mile. As you can see here that we did see quite a dramatic spike in fiscal 2021 for operating costs per passenger trip. And again, this is just because they did not decrease the amount of service. It's going to cost the same to move the vehicles, but there were fewer passengers paying. I did want to note here that the latest data for these measures is fiscal 2021. So this is slightly outdated. We don't have fiscal 2022 data yet. So we do expect that to level off a little bit. And then the final managing for results is a comparison of the bus system, Exhibit 7 on page 12, comparison of the bus system to our peer systems here. So these are similar figures that I just discussed. You can see in the first column that Baltimore system did have a lower than average expense per vehicle revenue mile, which is good, and a lower than average operating expense per passenger trip. So you can see compared to some other comparable systems across the nation there. So moving now to the budget in fiscal 2022, MTA received $527.5 million in operating federal relief fund. As I mentioned earlier, this is mostly just to replace lost revenue from decreased ridership, as well as just supporting general operations. An additional $106 million was added to the capital program to support the Purple Line project, specifically through the ARPA program. And in fiscal 2023, again, they're still receiving those federal stimulus funds, not quite as much, about $340 million. There is also a proposed deficiency of $14.6 million for the fiscal 2023 budget. This is in accordance with a bill that passed last year, Chapter 61, and this requires that anytime a deposit is made to the Maryland Stadium Facilities Fund, an equal deposit must be paid to MTA for bus rapid transit grants. Moving now to fiscal 2024, the budget that is before you, Exhibit 8, which is on page 14, is the overview of agency spending. As is typical, bus operations is making up just over half of the total budget operating, and then rail operations is just over a quarter. Exhibit 9 on page 15 shows the change in this year's proposed budget from fiscal 2023. As is typical, their personnel costs are increasing by a net $5.3 million, as is typical for many of the agencies. We're mostly seeing that increased costs in the pension system and workers' compensation. I did want to draw your attention to the increase in transit service contracts, which is almost 29 million. This is due to both increased riderships and just contracts regularly coming up for renewal, and they expect those contracts are going to be more. These contracts are used for various services, mostly paratransit and MARC service, where the service is provided by a contractor rather than by direct MTA employees. The other thing I wanted to draw your attention to is on the next page under other changes. This is grant funding for locally operated transit systems. So what this is funding that has been previously provided to the county and local transit systems. In the previous 2 fiscal years, many of these counties were using federal funds, and many of them have since run out of the federal funds that were available. And so the difference is now being made up by the MTA. They're just continuing to give them the funding that they were receiving prior to the pandemic. Moving on to personnel, which is at the bottom of page 16, there is no change in their positions in fiscal 2024. They did have a vacancy rate of about 8.8% as of January. I did check their February report and it has gone down to 8.5%. So moving in the right direction there. And I did just want to note a few items about their vacancy rate. So in accordance with a JCR requirement from last year, the agency did prepare a hiring and retention report that compared themselves to peer jurisdictions. So one of the main takeaways from this report is that challenges in transit personnel is not a Maryland unique problem. There was a national study that found that 96% of responding transit agencies had workforce shortages, and 84% stated that those challenges were actually affecting the ability to provide transit service. So MTA's vacancy rate is about double what it was before the pandemic, but it is still below the MDOT vacancy rate as a whole. And it is pretty substantially below the peer agency vacancy rate that they examined in their report, which was 13% as of October 1st. So the agency notes that challenges are arising both from vacancies and absenteeism of current employees. This is seen throughout the agency in operator, maintenance, and management and professional roles, particularly in frontline positions. It's especially challenging in positions that are very specialized. For example, people like light rail maintenance, that's very specialized and you need very specific training for that. Something else that I wanted to pull out from the report is the agency compared several specific positions and the salaries compared to peer jurisdictions. So they examined over 20 positions, and while in some cases there cannot be a direct comparison, the position name might be different, things like that. MTA salaries were lower than peer agencies for almost every single position that they compared. And in some cases they were substantially lower, more than 30% lower than transit agencies in other states. The agency noted some efforts that they have made to lower the vacancies, some MDOT-wide efforts, partnering with trade schools, apprenticeships, partnering with the Baltimore Mayor's office, and other things like that. And so DLS asks that the agency comment on its efforts to supplement salaries and wages to make them more competitive with peer transit agencies. And the agency should also be prepared to discuss how absenteeism is affecting transit service and the details of their new leave and absence management directive, which was just implemented in January. Moving now to the capital program. So Exhibit 10 on page 18 shows the capital spending by category in the fiscal 2023 to 2028 capital program. Total 6-year program totals $4.4 billion, which is a decrease of $184.7 million from the previous program. Just briefly touching on IIJA. So this is both the current federal authorization for transportation, including transit projects, and provides discretionary grant funding. So the agency has been active in applying for these discretionary grants, primarily through the RAISE program and the low and no emissions programs. So they have planned for $236.1 million in IIJA funding over the 6-year period, and there's more details about that in the appendix. And there is about $26 million in the fiscal 2024 allowance for IIJA funded projects. Exhibit 11 shows the PAYGO capital projects that are funded in fiscal 2024. And then Exhibit 12 is the capital cash flow changes. So what this is showing is fiscal 2023 as introduced compared to where we currently are in the current fiscal 2023 year compared to the allowance in fiscal 2024. So the main change here, you can see the share of federal funding is going down pretty substantially in the 2024 allowance. It's reduced by 220 million compared to 2023. So that is mostly due to the remainder of the federal funding for the Purple Line project is being applied to fiscal 2023 is the last year that that's applied. The agency also completed a major MARC project that was 80% federally funded. So as is typical with the MDOT TBUs, the agency makes up the difference by a greater allocation of special funds from the TTF, which accounts for that increase in the red bar there. Exhibit 13 is the capital program as introduced to working, delineated by each of these projects. And these are just typical changes that occur throughout the budget cycle due to things like permitting, procurement going faster or slower than anticipated, weather conditions, things like that. Exhibit 14 shows the fiscal 2023 working to the 2024 allowance. So this is just the change in annual funding for the various projects as programmed in the CTP. Exhibit 15 shows the first year funding, which Steve covered, the new requirement to report projects that are funded, either first year funding in design or in construction. So you can see in this pie chart here that 12% of the fiscal 2024 funding is in that first year category. And then Exhibit 16 shows the list of all of those projects that are first year, either in 2024 or first year in 2023 that was not reported last year. And finally, Exhibit 17 shows the major changes from last year's CTP. So these are just projects that appeared in the capital program for the first time. Moving on to the issues section of the analysis. So I just wanted to cover two major transit projects. So the Purple Line, which the committee is well familiar with, the Board of Public Works approved the contract for the new design build contractor in January 2022. And that was following the December approval of the settlement with the original contractor. So the revised total agreement is 9.3 billion, and that does include the settlement payment. And as of the December bi-monthly report, the overall project was 49% complete. You can see the subcategories of completion there. Revenue service was initially projected, this was prior to the departure of the first contractor, in March 2022. Revenue service is now expected in fall 2026. So the latest on the Purple Line is in November, a technical advisor identified a potential challenge with relocating some utilities that could potentially cause another delay in the project, potentially up to another 7-month delay. There has been no official change to the start date for revenue service availability, and that's because the partners are still deliberating how the change is going to affect the timeline. There has not been an agreed upon change in the official schedule as of yet. There has not been an official change in the schedule or the cost as of yet, and so that is the reason, according to the agency, that this potential issue was not reported in their bi-monthly reports. And I know they're going to cover that in their testimony as well. I also wanted to cover some Central Maryland transit opportunities. So Governor Moore publicly announced his intention to resurrect the Red Line Transit Project, which I'm sure everyone remembers. This was canceled in 2014 by former Governor Hogan. It was going to be an east-west transit light rail transit project in Baltimore City, and there was over 900 million in federal funding that was returned, and state funds that were planned for the project were redirected. So While we cannot resurrect the project exactly how it was, as there has been intervening development in the years since, the MTA was already undergoing the implementation of their regional transit plan for Central Maryland. So this is a 25-year plan. They first published it in October 2020. And several of the follow-up items from this plan include 2 studies to examine transit opportunities in Central Maryland. So there is a north-south corridor study, which is Towson to downtown, and an east-west, which is Hopkins Bayview to Ellicott City. And these Central Maryland transit studies are in the CTP. There's about 23 million planned until fiscal 2027. So in terms of the east-west study, which would be serving the approximate similar area that the red line would have served, they are currently in the alternatives analysis phase. So in the spring or summer, the agency is going to come back to the public to present options for alignment, transit modes, and station locations for public and stakeholder engagement and feedback. They expect that this process is going to take 1 to 2 years, and then it's going to result in the selection of one preferred alternative. As I mentioned, it would be impossible to bring back the project exactly as planned. There are some plans that the agency thinks that they can sort of pick up where they left off, and depending on the alternatives that are selected will sort of determine how much will need to be redone in terms of applying for federal funding and things like that. I also wanted to touch on Governor Moore's fiscal 2024 budget, which sets aside an additional $500 million as a dedicated reserve to support transportation priorities. This is separate from the CTP. And so the agency notes that that has not been earmarked for one specific project. It could support Baltimore City Transit. It could be congestion relief in the DC area. Or it could be a MARC project or something else. So the agency should comment on efforts to keep the Purple Line project on schedule, including maintaining transparency if further delays arise. They should also be prepared to discuss how community engagement will be prioritized as the regional transit plan for Central Maryland moves forward. And there is a recommended action on this as well, which I will circle back to in just a moment. The second issue that I wanted to cover is regarding mobility paratransit. So mobility paratransit is supplied by the MTA, and it is required by the Americans with Disabilities Act. It's available for folks with disabilities who live within a certain geographic range of fixed route transit stations. So the on-time performance for this mode suffered severely, as you can see, in calendar 2021, specifically through the summer and fall there. I did want to note that the threshold for on-time performance for mobility, as I mentioned earlier, is quite wide. So the rides are considered on time if they are within 30 minutes of the scheduled pickup time. So that is quite a wide window of being considered on time. As you can see from Exhibit 18 here, they reached a low of just 59% of rides arriving on time in September 2021. And then it started to go up and then really was moving in the right direction starting in March 2022. In calendar 2022, the average was 88% of on-time service, which was a significant improvement of 75% in calendar 2021. So in response to this poor performance throughout calendar 2021, the Budget Committee's restricted funds in the budget pending a report on these delayed services. So if no further action is requested by the committees, DLS recommends the $100,000 in special funds be released. And I'm going to cover just a little bit what the conclusions of the report. So the agency notes that during the pandemic, the demand for these paratransit services declined, and many of their operators simply sought alternative employment. And so once demand picked back up, they had a serious operator shortage, which resulted in this delay in timely service. So the agency issued emergency contracts to supplement their existing operators, and they also undertook some longer term strategies to supplement their operators. So in April 2022, MTA awarded new service contracts. They were hoping to incentivize sufficient staffing levels. They increased the minimum wage for operators. It is now $20 to $21 an hour. It was $18 in 2021 and $15 or less before 2021. So the demand, as I mentioned earlier, has nearly returned to pre-pandemic levels. So it is very important that they attract and retain those operators. They also launched a new trip reservation system website and phone app so that you can see exactly where your ride is. They launched that just this month, and they're going to cover that in their testimony as well, just seeking to continue that customer service aspect. The report also required that the agency report on delayed service and how it can be mitigated. There is an operations control center that monitors all the trips and runs a late line where customers can call and see what's going on if they're experiencing a delay in service. They do dispatch on-call drivers if there is something that happens, if there's an accident or some sort of malfunction. But during peak hours, especially given these operator workforce challenges, all the drivers are already out. Exhibit 19 shows the delayed trips by the severity of the delay. So in fiscal 2022, 17% of trips were late by 1 to 30 minutes. And 4% of trips were late by 31 to 60 minutes. Only 2.6% were delayed by an hour or more. So again, this is a significant improvement of the challenges that they were facing in calendar 2021. The agency also notes they're working with a consultant to test recommended changes to the scheduling algorithms and software programs to continue to promote efficiency. So DLS recommends MTA comment on the on-time threshold for mobility paratransit, which, as I said, is 30 minutes in either direction of the scheduled trip time, how that relates to the on-time thresholds for the other service modes, and if these performance improvements may lead to a change in those benchmarks. Finally, the recommended actions on the operating side is to continue to require the agency to provide those bi-monthly update reports on the purple line as they have been doing this past year, and restricting $100,000 of special funds for that. And then the PAYGO recommendation is to concur with the governor's allowance. That concludes my formal presentation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Carrie. Very thorough as always. I did have one question on the local share. I'm not sure which page it's on. Just if we have a list of how that the former federal funding that the MTA is now picking up for the locals.
Yes,
Do we have a breakdown of that? That's on page 16.
I do not, but I would be happy to get that for you.
Okay.
I believe they addressed that in their testimony in the House yesterday, so they could
Okay.
probably elaborate on that a little bit
Wonderful.
further for you. I do know that some of the counties had sort of run out of their federal money, and so some of them had not yet. So this is supplementing, I believe it was Montgomery County, supplementing that federal money that they had received, filling that gap.
Okay, thank you. I'm curious the long-term plan after this year, but we can cover that next. Seeing no other questions, Mr. Secretary, welcome again. And we have Ms. Holly Arnold, Administrator for the MTA. Before you get started, I want to say it feels, I was not on the subcommittee last year, but it feels like some of the actions the subcommittee took were pretty constructive. And I'm curious if you feel the same way, and if, Mr. Secretary, we could possibly apply some of these lessons from MTA to other units. I think that might be a constructive start. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, I'm Paul Wiedefeld, Secretary of the Maryland Department of Transportation. Again, I'd like to thank Carrie Cook for her thorough review of the MTA's budget and professionalism throughout the process. Over the past year, MTA has continued to recover ridership on all their modes, as was referenced. This is a trend that we expect to continue as the administration prioritizes key investments in maintaining and growing our transit systems. The state is fully committed to delivering on the promises of a safe, efficient, equitable transportation system for Maryland citizens and all the riders who rely on it for access to school, work, and all life's activities. Transit's benefits are numerous, and continued investment in our transit systems are critical to ensuring strong economic growth within the state. Under my direction, MTA will be focused on increasing the reliability of the existing transportation system and moving forward with investments that will allow the network to grow. I'm now pleased to introduce Holly Arnold, Administrator of the Maryland Transit Administration. Holly has been with the MTA for over 10 years and the past year and a half as the administrator. Holly?
Thank you, Secretary Wiedefeld. Good afternoon, Chair Elfreth and members of the committee. I'm Holly Arnold, the Administrator of the Maryland Transit Administration. I'd really like to thank Carrie Cook for her thoughtful questions and partnership in preparing this budget. So as administrator of MTA and a daily rider of our service, I'm fully committed to delivering a safe, frequent, reliable, and easy to use transit system. In 2022, we advanced projects that will mean better service and more options for our riders. We were awarded several significant competitive grants, including $6 million for the raise funding for the Baltimore Penn Station Connections Project, and over $7 million as part of the All Stations Accessibility Program for the renovation of Martin State Airport Station. We partnered with Amtrak on the Susquehanna River Bridge project and won a $20 million grant to complete the final design of that project. And we completed a major project with the opening of our Mark Riverside facility, which is a $64 million building that will allow us to improve equipment and maintenance repair times and lead to increased fleet availability and improved on-time performance for our riders. And we launched a campaign against sexual harassment on our system to make sure that everyone feels safe when riding. We're focused on efforts that will make a difference to our riders, and we're going to keep focusing on that. So given that, I'd like to talk a little bit about what we're doing to make our system more reliable. So as Carrie noted, transit agencies across the country have been impacted by a workforce shortage, and MTA is no different. The challenges that we're faced in hiring staff have impacted our overall service reliability and is a key factor in our ability to consistently deliver on our scheduled service. So our team has prioritized our hiring and retention efforts to address these challenges. So this includes new collective bargaining agreements with 2 of our unions that include significant pay increases and new benefits, reviewing our internal standards for hiring candidates, including looking at years of experience and background check requirements, new social media campaigns and videos highlighting the reasons that MTA is a great place to work. And we launched an updated webpage with key information about the benefits of working at MTA and trying to make it easier to apply. So these are so important because we are seeing our ridership continuing to grow following the COVID-19 pandemic. In 2022, our ridership grew 18% compared to the prior year. Last year, we did see post-COVID highs on all of our ridership, and we expect that to continue. So while we haven't returned to those pre-COVID levels, we're on our way, and MTA needs to be ready for those riders and to support the growing region. That said, ridership in and of itself doesn't tell the full story of the importance of transit to the region. There are countless benefits when it comes to transit. More and better transit means economic mobility for individuals who don't have access to a car. Fewer single occupancy vehicles on the road, which leads to decreased emissions and roadway congestion, and increased development in the communities that it serves. Transit is a critical component to serving the needs of the region, and a great region needs great transit. So on that note, while we're focused on increasing the reliability of our current services, we're also working on expanding our services through new projects and initiatives. And this includes moving forward on both the east-west and north-south corridor studies in Baltimore as part of the Central Maryland Regional Transit Plan, advancing the Southern Maryland Rapid Transit Project study, which will help to provide transit access to the fastest growing region of Maryland, converting our fleet of buses to zero emission vehicles, which includes new coaches, maintenance facilities, and charging infrastructure, with our pilot program anticipated to begin later this year. And we executed an MOU with Amtrak to build the new Frederick Douglass Tunnel in Baltimore, which opens up the possibility of 30-minute service between Baltimore and DC, and constructs a new ADA accessible West Baltimore MARC station. And you may have seen we were visited by President Biden to highlight the importance of that project. Obviously, I can't talk about expansion without mentioning the Purple Line. Construction on this 16-mile light rail project is well underway, and the team is hard at work to deliver a project that serves the needs of the region. So needless to say, there's a lot going on at MTA, and it's clear that the future of transit in Maryland is bright. So at this point, I'd like to take a moment just to respond to the items raised in the budget analysis. So first, DLS asked, could we comment on the efforts to supplement salaries and wages to make the agency more competitive, and also talk about how absenteeism impacts transit services and the details of our leave and absence management directive. So first, regarding wages, as I mentioned, we did recently enter into new collective bargaining agreements with our local 1300 and local 2 unions. And so this guarantees increased wages for our operators, mechanics, and union office workers over the next 4 years. And we think that's going to go a long way to making us be more competitive in the labor market. So regarding absenteeism, absenteeism combined with the hiring challenges really just directly impact our service reliability. If we don't have the people available to work, then we can't put the service out on the street. So our new leave and absence management directive that we launched in mid-January, it includes kind of updated and clearer guidance for our employees about their available leave, gives them more options on how they can use it, and allows us to utilize it in a way that meets the needs of our riders. We've added more technology to help us track it better. And we're hiring case managers to monitor how folks are using it and provide counseling to employees who may be running out of leave. We want to make sure they understand the options and the benefits that we do have in our system. And so if they need extra help, that they're going to get it through these case managers. And so while it's still very early, we're only about a month in, we are already seeing improvements in reliability as a result of these new efforts, and we're going to continue to focus on that. Next, it was noted to comment on the efforts to keep the Purple Line project on schedule and maintain transparency if future delays arise. So regarding that timeline, we are currently working through schedule mitigation opportunities with our private contractor with the goal of producing a revised schedule. It is a negotiation and we're kind of going back and forth with the contractor. We haven't agreed to any new dates yet, although I can say like it is going to change, but we just haven't had a date yet that we can share. So as soon as we have something that we can share, we'll be happy to put that out to everyone and the public. And we're going to continue our regular our CAP meetings and public outreach on the project as we move throughout. And then also prepared to discuss how community engagement will be prioritized as part of the regional transit plan. So honestly, community engagement is critical to everything that we do at MTA. We make sure that all of our projects we're engaging with our riders, with the communities that we serve. We've been very focused on making sure that we're hearing from everybody. So doing outreach on the buses, at bus stops, at stations to hear from the people who are riding the system, as well as door-to-door outreach for people who live in the communities. And so we're really expanding on those efforts, making sure that we're talking to people where they are and how they talk. So we're doing a Spanish language event tomorrow, actually, as part of our East West Raise project, to make sure that everyone can comment on the project. And then finally, noted the MTA should comment on the on-time threshold for mobility paratransit in relation to other modes and whether we would think about changing that. So at this point, we do follow the industry standard for paratransit, which is a 30-minute pickup window, but we are always looking for options to improve the service for our mobility paratransit riders. We did recently launch our mobility app, which we got a lot of feedback from riders as we were developing it in the beta testing phases to make sure that meets their needs. And we've got a lot of great feedback so far. So it allows folks to see their ride in real time. And I will tell you, as a transit rider, having that assurance that, hey, your ride is coming is really fantastic. It makes a huge difference. Last, I'll note that, we do concur with the recommended actions. And with that, I am happy to take any questions.
Okay. Senator Jackson, Senator Salling, and then I have a few.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Administrator. Just a couple of quick questions. Go back to the absenteeism. I believe in Ms. Cook's statement, she mentioned that some of the absenteeisms were in highly classified or skilled job sets. So what's your answer to that? If it's not a labor, well, if it's a highly skilled set, what's your answer to folks not showing up to work? And I know you mentioned you're working toward it, and it's connected to, did you begin to see that during COVID or since COVID, or has this been an existing problem?
So this has been an existing issue at MTA and honestly transit agencies across the country. I'm sure Secretary Wiedefeld can tell you he battled the same battles that I'm dealing with when he was at MTA and at WMATA. So it's been an ongoing issue. I will say that COVID has made it harder. A lot of folks, caregivers, for example, are having more issues than they used to in terms of providing the care for their kids, for their elderly adults. Those opportunities aren't there as much. And so that is popping up more. This new absenteeism policy, we gave people, 2 additional personal days that they can use however that they need without having to call off in advance. And it just gives more guidance in terms of how they can use their existing leave. And so, it's really kind of cracked down on people maybe taking advantage of that and are showing up more. Regarding highly skilled folks who aren't available, we overtime, unfortunately. So, we do rely on quite a bit of overtime from existing workers to cover those times.
Okay, so if you would please keep us in the loop as you work through that. Lastly, Madam Chair, well, cross training. I guess if we could you also talk to us about your internal training policies to help you as you navigate this. Lastly, I will be reaching out to your office. There's a piece of legislation that we have going forward that deals with the expansion of your services to some of the rural areas, because that's a huge issue for us. It's crossed, well, I was overloaded on bills, so I don't know who's picking up on the Senate side. I'll be a co-sponsor, but in the House is Jared Solomon. We're part of the Transit Caucus, so we'll be in touch. Thank you.
Sounds great. Senator Solomon, before I get to you, just continue on this note. So what I think is very constructive feedback feedback on page 17, based on the restricted funding last year and the work internally that you've done to identify not just where your vacancies and absentee issues are, but your approach to redressing them, frankly. So, Mr. Secretary, is this something that you would consider for all of your units? Because I think this is incredibly constructive feedback, not just for the budget committees, but frankly for your department.
Exactly. No, I will be following up. It is a good example. Good
Okay.
model.
Okay, thank you. Senator Sulling.
Thank you very much for the information. One of our major problems that we've had is, it's a good thing and a bad thing. Trayport Atlantic, over 12,000 employees now, and is doing great things.
Yes.
But transportation has been the issue. And they have, and you have been working with them to make availability to MTA and getting it and expanding that. We've had other lines that were there when they had, and I remember being knee-high to a grasshopper to say, we had over 20,000 employees there. I lived right down the street from there at that time. And they were existing lines. And I've always said, go back to your history, because this is going to do nothing but pick up. That's just one of the things I think we need to continue to work with. I thank you working with them, but I'm hoping that we continue that because it's important. We want people to work. You need people to work. They need people to work. We're all doing that. Is there some more possibly that we can do? I know we're working together, but is there some things also you're looking into?
Yeah, so Trayport Atlantic has been, as you say, a fantastic partner in working with us. They made sure when they designed the roads that we could turn our buses. They actually built bus stops for us. You'd be surprised because a lot of places don't do that. And so it's been a great partnership. They also share information for us in terms of shift times so that we know when people need to be there. And they share, anonymized information about where folks are coming from so we can design our routes to make sure that, hey, the employees, where they're coming from, we can get them there. I will note last year we launched the Express Bus 163 from West Baltimore, which shaves 20 minutes off the travel time, and it has been a huge success. In terms of future partnerships, so again, that continued partnership, we're always looking at ways we can better serve that area. One thing we're currently taking a look at is it just takes us a long time to go around the loop. It's a gigantic area. And so are there opportunities to maybe have like a shuttle that does that and people transfer to that, which might speed up the travel time to get there. And as we look at the Central Maryland Regional Transit Plan, the corridor studies, a big focus coming from Baltimore County is how do we make those connections from Bayview into Trayport Atlantic, right? That last, it's about 10 miles out there. And so that will be a continued focus of the agency is how we serve the population.
Thank you. And if I could, just one more thing, the importance of what you said and how I'm going to emphasize it, studies. And what we're going to be doing through looking into the Towson downtown and the Bayview and the other study that you want to do. I emphasize this because there was an incident that happened in the county which they didn't have communication with the people. And it's very important that they're a part of that conversation. I'm going to emphasize what you said. We have to have those conversations because if you don't have them, you'll just have fights. I'll have fights. I don't want them. You don't want them. But it's important to have that communication. Towson has worked with the administration and gave availability to your department, and I'm glad they did that. I hope they continue to do that working with the county. But I just can't emphasize that. It's so important that we have that communication, and I want to thank you for that. Thank you.
In that vein, the full committee just passed a bill 2 weeks ago to further expand job growth and opportunities at Trade Point. So I'd love for MTA to continue to work with not just Senator Sulling, but Senator Gazzoni, I think 10,000 more jobs.
Yes.
Senator, so we're going to need to get out ahead of that.
Yes, no,
Okay.
we're planning now for the
Okay.
expansion and we know it's going to continue to
You're gonna
grow.
be
and
out the windows
we
like
need
this
to be
week.
ready for it to happen.
We appreciate that. Similar vein on park connectivity or connectivity with parks. I know, thank you for working with us last year on Great Maryland Outdoors Act. So I'd love to continue to brainstorm ways that we could utilize MTA to better connect folks to their outdoor spaces. It's not a question so much as a let's continue to work together.
Absolutely.
And then really appreciate your aggression in a positive way with federal grant opportunities, and would love to more regularly keep in touch about what you're pursuing and what you're receiving, because I think it's going to touch all of our communities.
Yeah, that's one thing we're working on is we created a new position in our Department of Planning that's really like a partnership position to make sure that when we're doing all these things, we need to share with our elected officials in particular that we're doing them. And so that you'll see a lot more of that coming from our department.
And final question on the local share or local support. Where is that money going, and your long-term plans for perhaps making up that funding gap?
Yeah, so whenever we got the federal relief funds, the COVID funds, they provided sometimes very substantial amounts of funding for the local transit agencies, in some cases, more than a couple 100% that of their operating budget for an annual basis. And so we've been taking a look at the burn rate of those funds and making sure that we're going to be ready to backfill with state funds when that happens. So this year, Montgomery and Prince George's counties have spent all of their federal relief funds, and so that's what this is anticipated for. And then as the other counties get there, we'll be planning to increase the same way.
Okay, thank you very much. Seeing no further questions, appreciate you being here. We do have 3 witnesses signed up, so I'd appreciate if you stuck around to listen to their feedback as well. Mr. John Corrin, Mr. Eric Norton, and then after they testify, Ms. Lindsay Mendelson. Reminder, 2.5 minutes. We appreciate your feedback.
Thank you again, John Corrin, Bicycle Advocates for Annapolis and Anne Arundel County. I also chair the Anne Arundel County Bicycle Advisory Commission, and I sit on the Anne Arundel County Transportation Commission. I have a thank you, and then a kind of a micro recommendation and a macro recommendation. The thank you is bikes on trains, bikes on the front of buses, bikes on the light rail, bike racks at the transit stations. It's clear that MTA is focused on the last mile. How do people safely get to and from their transit stop at origin and at destination? But the micro recommendations, I think we can do more. And this requires collaboration of localities together with MTA to make sure we've got safe routes. Odenton comes to mind. TOD is coming to Odenton. We got federal funding for a structured parking facility. Fort Meade desperately wants people to come there without using a car. In fact, there's a gate open only to bicyclists that's near the Odenton Mark Station. So working on that last mile, I think together we can do more. The macro is when we developed the Move Anne Arundel Strategic Transportation Plan for the county, we very much mirrored the state's transportation plan, but we went one step further in an important area. We set quantified goals for mode share to shift away from single occupancy vehicles to transit, biking, walking, carpooling, et cetera. And we set goals for the entire county and the more aggressive goals for our town centers, where there's greater density and access to transit. And I would encourage the state to do the same thing. The state attainment report measures mode share, but we actually haven't set goals to shift it and then to align our resources and our policies to help achieve that shift. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Appreciate your time speaking today. My name is Eric Norton. I'm the Director of Policy and Programs with the Central Maryland Transportation Alliance. We're a nonprofit based out of the Baltimore area, but work in sort of the greater Baltimore region, trying to improve and expand transportation options for the people and businesses in that area. And we're also a member of the Transform Maryland Transportation Coalition. You should have written testimony from us. And Madam Chair, my deepest apologies. We copied this committee, but we copied Senator McCray, I believe. So I'm sorry, I have a physical copy if you'd like it, but it won't happen again. So I won't read the testimony. We reference another letter that we sent to Secretary Wiedefeld outlining sort of some of the challenges that MTA riders are facing. It's nothing that you probably haven't heard before. No-show buses, disabled trains, things like that. They mentioned their challenges with workforce challenges. So we've heard all that. So I won't bring you more of the problems, but I will bring you a solution because who wouldn't rather hear a solution than hear a problem? And that is the availability of flexing federal funds. You talked about MTA being very aggressive in going after those discretionary grants, but there's also this automatic money that the state gets through these formula programs that USDOT sends down the pipe. And historically, we've sort of put those in buckets of highway dollars and transit dollars. But for the last 30 years, that hasn't really been the case. There's been flexibility with those funds, and they're more surface transportation dollars. The biggest grant program is called Surface Transportation Block Grants, and up to 50% of that can be flexed to biking, walking, transit, electrification. It doesn't have to be spent just on highways or widening highways or capacity. So we would just want to make you aware of that. We sent you also submitted a one-pager about that. This is, hundreds of millions of dollars of automatic money every year that you don't have to apply for, but can be flexed to these other uses to tackle some of the problems that you've heard about today. So thank you very much for your time.
And last but not least, Miss Lindsay Mendelson from the Maryland Sierra Club.
Thank you, members of the committee. My name is Lindsay Mendelson, and I'm the transportation representative with the Maryland Sierra Club. The Maryland Sierra Club has over 70,000 members and supporters across the state of Maryland. And like Eric Norton, I'm here to testify to encourage this body and MDOT to really exercise its ability to flex federal transportation dollars to transit, cycling, pedestrian projects that will advance equity and achieve our climate goals. Eric mentioned that two of these largest transportation dollars that Maryland receives each year are from the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program and the National Highway Performance Program. I wanted to note that the bipartisan infrastructure package that Congress passed in 2021 increased these formula amounts that Maryland receives each year, and does note that 50% of the funds can be transferred to from traditional highway grants to programs that allow for spending on transit, cycling, pedestrian infrastructure. However, Maryland only currently flexes a very small amount, 3% to these uses. So Sierra Club encourages MDOT to flex the full 50% of these funds and also provide transparency with how these funds are flexed, both in the Consolidated Transportation Program and in the statewide transportation improvement in the STIP as well. For years, Maryland has been overspending on increasing highway capacity and underspending on everything else, from maintaining our existing road and transit infrastructure to creating sidewalks, expanding bike trails and transit. So flexing federal funds from projects and programs that increase vehicle miles traveled is not the right direction. We need to be instead moving towards policies that will help to reduce vehicle trips and advance equity. Currently, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act plan that was released a couple of years ago indicates that there's billions of dollars in unfunded public transportation strategies that are needed to hit our climate targets. In addition, I just wanted to mention that the Maryland Commission on Climate Change's annual report also contained a similar recommendation that the governor should flex these funds for these uses. And I wanted to thank the Transit Caucus for also pointing this out as well. So in summary, please utilize the flexibility of these funds to reduce climate pollution, improve equity, and improve mobility. Thank you so much.
Have Department of Environment, Mr. Andrew Gray. Give him a moment. Okay. And for folks listening at home, we might have a freeze on your screen. I hope you can still hear us. And I'll ask my staff, who's also probably listening, to text me if you cannot hear us, if they can hear us at all. Okay. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll now present the Maryland Department of the Environment's fiscal 2024 budget analysis. The first page there, you see the budget decreases $26 million or 10.7% to $217.6 million. Jump right into the managing for results exhibits. Exhibit 1 reflects the Maryland air pollutant trends relative to the air quality standards. What you want to see here is those lines dipping below the 0%. So that means we're meeting the standard. So we're looking good for all but the ozone 8-hour standard, where we're still kind of hovering just above that standard line. And it's been a couple of years now. It's obviously a challenge in order to kind of get there. In terms of the exhibit 2 reflects integrated surface water report changes. So what reflects here is the 2010 submission data through the 2020-22 report. So there's a combined report. There's a delay in getting the report completed, so they combine 2 years as allowed by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. What I'd like to just highlight here is that under category 5, we're seeing fewer TMDLs being needed, which is good, but we're not actually seeing any complete addressing of the designated uses or the kind of the water quality needs of our water bodies. So we're seeing the kind of total maximum daily or plans for kind of getting there being completed. And then some of the things that are wrong with the water bodies being addressed, but none of them are getting to that 1 category. We're still seeing 0. So there's no change in 12 years in terms of the water quality for the kind of the waters that needed have some kind of impairment, which I find interesting. It's something I've highlighted every once in a while. It's probably a challenge nationwide. When I understand the Clean Water Act originally anticipated, between the 70s that they'd be completed by 1985. And obviously we're still having trouble. Exhibit 3 reflects the child blood lead status. This information reflects a rising trend in terms of the children tested between 0 and 72 months, although we don't have any information for 2021. And the decrease between 2019 and 2020 largely reflects the COVID-19 pandemic. But regardless, the information does reflect that we're seeing fewer kids that are reporting exceedances of the elevated blood lead standard. And that's excellent, even the more stringent standard. Just like to highlight here also that the administration announced on October 24th, 2022, that they've reduced the trigger notification from 5 to 3.5 micrograms per deciliter, which is even more stringent, which is excellent for ensuring the health and well-being of our population. Exhibit 4, Public Information Act and permit data. So what you're seeing here is a tale of one positive trend here in terms of the blue line rising. So that's your percent of Public Information Act responses issued within 30 days. And the administration has really highlighted this in terms of their work, really focused on this, and it's shown. We're actually seeing results. However, we're seeing a declining trend for the permits processed within the applicable standard time. So that's your purple line here. So that's going down. And that potentially could be a result of the increase in the number of permits that are being processed or needed or kind of being applied for, but still something that the administration should be concerned about and kind of address. In terms of the fiscal 23 deficiency, the Governor Westmore submitted a deficiency for around $12.5 million in general funds and $1 million in special funds for MDE. The funding is in kind of 2 main categories, or 3 main categories, excuse me. There's $7 million increase for the to address the backlog of oil contaminated site environmental cleanup fund reimbursement requests. There's also $4.5 million for 3 administrations to address declining special fund revenues. And this is an ongoing problem we'll talk about as an issue in this analysis. So 3 main special funds to kind of support those administrations, and we're just not seeing the revenues necessary in order to be able to do the work that we need to do. Therefore, we're seeing $4.5 million in general funds for that purpose. There's also funding for the Air and Radiation Administration related to the strategic energy investment from, to address the Chapter 38 of 2022, the Climate Solutions Now Act. So it reflects positions, 9 positions, and funding to address some of the needs there. The federal stimulus funds discussion is very brief here. Just the MD is focused primarily on the PAYGO side of the funding in terms of the Drinking Water Revolving Loan Fund and the Water Quality Revolving Loan Fund. Does recommend that MD comment on the potential funding opportunities through the Inflation Reduction Act and MD's planned efforts to pursue competitive funding. The overview of agency spending, coordinating offices, around $80.2 million is around 37% of the agency's budget. There's around $28 million for debt service, the Bay Restoration Fund bonds, and there's also $20 million for the Clean Water Commerce Act, reflect a lot of the money. And then salaries reflect a lot of the other funding for the different administrations here, although there's certainly certain contract and grant funding too. Proposed budget, Exhibit 6 on page 16. So it shows that change, $26 million decrease in the 2 years. Just focus here on the personnel expenses briefly, $3.4 million for new positions, 69 new position increase. And we'll get into that, what exactly those positions are. It's around $2.9 million for employee and retired health insurance. And then there's also this miscellaneous adjustments reflected here. It's $9.5 million, really double counted money, reflecting that deficiency money coming in fiscal 23, the general funds. Then in terms of environmental policy actions related to the MDE's fiscal 24 budget, the mussel restoration projects funded by the Exelon Conowingo settlements, around $1 million increase. So this is the money that's coming in as a result of the agreement with Exelon for the water quality certification, or to basically to address their permit required for relicensing. So as discussed in the Chesapeake Bay overview analysis, there's FERC is now, or the courts, excuse me, have basically ruled that the agreement was not appropriate for the purposes of water quality certification. But the administration continues to believe that the settlement agreement, at least for the funding, will continue going forward. There's also PFAS chemical take back required funding. There's from chapter 38 and 138, 39, 22, just $500,000. And then in terms of kind of routine operations, the main kind of change here is the $5 million decrease in the Bay Restoration Fund revenue bond debt service as a result of getting closer to our 2030 deadline for the revenue bonds that we've issued. It's also the deadline in terms of the sunsetting of the fee as well. Now, in terms of some of the personnel budgeting, the expenditures, we do have updated information here. So this sounds kind of very harsh, but we do have feeling that things are getting better. We had a discussion about this. There were some concerns about how the prior year money is budgeted. So it's not necessarily reflected in the sub objects that we'd like to see it. We couldn't do year-to-year comparisons. So a couple of years have had problems with this. Restricted funding, money wasn't released, or the problem was not resolved. And then this year, the information came in similarly without the issue being resolved. We do understand, though, there was a technical issue with the data being sent over, and that this has been resolved. We received the data separately from the original process, and we're assured that going forward, this will be addressed. Also, in part of this is the consideration of the miscellaneous adjustments, which I also understand is being addressed by the Department of Budget and Management, will allow better year comparison and help you guys understand our budget. DLS recommends that the budget bill language be added just to make sure that we're all on the same page going forward for the next budget.
Not restricted funds.
We think we should include it. That's obviously up to you guys. Just include it, and then it'll be released as soon as it's all submitted properly. So for personnel data, these 69 position increase, there's a number of things going on here. There's funding or positions, excuse me, for addressing the needs in the Water and Science Administration related to the water supply program. We'll talk about that as an issue. There's 24 positions there. There's also positions to deal with discharge permits, the zombie permit issue. There are 35 positions, the Water and Science Administration, 8 positions, the Land and Materials Administration, and finally 2 positions in the Land and Materials Administration to address the PFAS requirement take back program as well. First issue, the water supply program under staffing. So what happened here is a big splash by the Maryland Attorney General press release, December 1, 2021, saying that there was problems in the Maryland's water supply program, that the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency had some concerns and that this could potentially endanger our delegation of authority to run that program. So in terms of the information surrounding that, there was a report by a private consultant that kind of looked at Maryland's program and identified some areas for assistance and help to kind of improve matters in terms of staffing and funding. In terms of the main problems the report identifies, filling existing vacancies, developing a resource investment plan with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, or in terms of some of the recommended issue or addressing potential ways to address that, utilizing the 4% set aside funding for the Drinking Water Revolving Loan Fund, increasing state investment in the water quality or water supply program general funds, and creating a fee system are all opportunities to address the main concerns that they found, including regular position contractual FTE decreases and increased workload and general program understaffing considerations. So Maryland Department of the Environment did submit a resource investment plan to EPA in May 2022, reflecting the need for $13.25 million or additional $5 million in the water supply program in order to kind of get up to speed in terms of where they wanted to be staffing wise. And EPA kind of did note, or that plan did note that there had been a certain number of staffing up within that fiscal year. Fiscal 24 allowance does reflect an increase in prior funding from the Drinking Water Revolving Loan Fund, non-project set-aside funding. So that's from prior year allowances for that. It includes 78 regular positions, an increase of 25 positions from fiscal 23. However, there has been a reduction of 6 contractual FTEs from 14 to 8. So in terms of the overall numbers, we're not necessarily seeing a 25 FTE increase. So obviously moving in the right direction. However, the combined 86 regular positions and contractual FTEs will not meet the goal of 102 staff by the middle of calendar 2024, nor will we kind of be at the $13.25 million funding level, or if only at 10.5 right now. Therefore, DLS recommends MD comment on how it plans to meet the goal of the combined 102 regular positions at $13.3 million in funding, given that the budget does not include that. Then moving on to the second issue, this concerns the compliance and enforcement position quarterly reports. So funding was restricted for a number of years now for funding to first fill vacant compliance and enforcement positions, and then also to provide for kind of quarterly reporting on how things are going in terms of the programs in Maryland Department of Agriculture, Maryland Department of the Environment. So a couple of things I'd like to highlight here. MD is now sharing additional compliance and enforcement data online through Open MDE, which is excellent. There's also the federal U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's ECHO website that provides that service as well. They've provided some enhanced compliance oversight, particularly for in the April 22 focused on air quality in the Curtis Bay area. My understanding was there was an explosion at the CSX coal terminal. And so they've done some monitoring there. There's been some kind of U.S. Environmental Protection Agencies use a portable air monitoring device, which actually found excessive volatile organic compounds leaking from a fuel processing facility, which is very interesting in terms of use of the technology to kind of get at some of our needs in terms of environmental protection. Then chapter 22 is the kind of administrative continuation of permits. Discussion here about how there will be additional work needed in that particular area. Let's talk about next generation compliance tools, the idea of using some kind of remote sensing, kind of satellite imagery to understand where we're seeing kind of disturbed soils or kind of plants dying. So there were kind of some kind of concerns of some kind. There's also the idea of being able to just use smartphones to be able to have somebody show people around a poultry operation so that there aren't any concerns about biohazards and tracking in the highly pathogenic avian influenza or spreading it, for instance. And then just really briefly here, just like GLS recommends that the language be continued for fiscal 25. Then the special fund shortfalls, we talked briefly about that, $4.5 million in the budget in general funds is a deficiency. There's a number of years we've seen this, not a great thing. It means there's a problem in terms of the fee structure and the revenues or the expenses that are not being covered in general. According to the polluter pays principle, the idea is that basically everybody should internalize the costs of doing business. And it doesn't appear that that's necessarily the case. We've highlighted this a couple of years now in terms of the need. The Water and Science Administration, Maryland Clean Water Funds and Primary Fund for that administration receives a number of general permit fees and penalties. They largely remained unchanged since 2002. Land and Materials Administration led Poison Prevention Fund, supported by fees from 2012. The Air and Radiation Administration supported by various Title V operating permits and other permits that maybe have been addressed in almost 10 years. DLS again recommends MD comment to why it is using general fund revenue to support the administrations instead of using or revising the outdated fee structures, and also recommends language restricting funding until a report on that issue. The fourth and final issue concerns the U.S. Tire Cleanup and Recycling Fund annual report. It's submitted and it looks good actually that the private individuals are being held responsible for the illegal scrap tire stockpiles and they're doing their cleanups. So that's fantastic. DLS, however, does recommend that language be added restricting funding for that report again. First recommendation there concerns the scrap tire annual report, just noted. Then you've got the second recommendation, $200,000 until the personnel expenditures, so kind of pro forma things. It looks like we're all on the same page. And then recommendation three, $100,000 restriction until the report submitted on the special funds, the needs for the special fund and revised fee structures. And finally, annual language for MDE and the Maryland Department of Agriculture on the quarterly reporting for enforcement compliance inspection positions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. Questions for our analyst? Okay, seeing none, Madam Secretary, thank you for your patience. And you can bring whoever you'd like, recognizing we're still frozen for folks listening in at home, but I hope they can hear us. So I haven't gotten a complaint yet, so I think they can hear us. Please.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and subcommittee members. It's good to be here again. I would first like to thank you, Andrew, for your thorough analysis. And I do appreciate you highlighting some of the good things a lot of the good things that we're doing and a lot of the progress that we're making. But I do appreciate the areas that we need to look at as well. So because we did submit our written response, so I won't go into a lot of detail, but there are three programmatic issues that I'd like to highlight that was highlighted. One is, I'd like to talk about fees. I agree with what was written in the analysis that we can't continue to ask for general funds for our programs when we clearly have a fee structure issue that we need to look into. And so I'm telling you now today that I commit to looking at the fee structures and see if we can update those fees in some of the areas. We have to look and see which fees and what that timing would look like. But it has been a long time, and I noted that. So that's my commitment. The second issue is related to vacancies. We do have a 10% vacancy rate right now. My plan is to get us down to 5% very soon. We have 94 vacancies, but we have 50 vacancies that we're actively recruiting for, which kind of takes us down to about 5%. So we're getting there. We are looking at ways to streamline our process, the internal process that is, but there is an external process too that might need to be streamlined that we'd be happy to be a part of that. But our part, we will clean up that process so we can get the vacancies backfilled. The last issue I'd like to highlight are the administratively extended permits that sometimes are called ghost or zombie permits. We have about 564 permits that we administer. There's about 200 and I think 74 or somewhere around 247 permits that were administratively extended, but we have gotten that number down. We're at about 91 now. And so we're making good progress. We are trying very hard to get that number down to 0. But I will tell you that part of the reason why we have been extending those permits is, well, it's a lot of reasons. Sometimes we need more information and we just have to extend those permits, but we also need additional staff. And a recent study that was done concluded that we need about 30 different additional positions. And I was happy to see that the administration did put in 14 additional ones. So we're getting there, but in order to stop the cycle of these zombie permits, as they're called, we do need to make sure we have the proper resources and staff to do it. That's it for me for now. So I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, I think Senator Jackson was first and then Senator Solon.
Madam Secretary, welcome. I
Thank
look
you.
forward to sitting down with you.
Me too.
SB 743. So I look forward to
Yes.
speaking with you. Your office sent an information document. We tried to reach out prior
Yep.
because the committee hearing was yesterday. So we
Yes.
need to
We do.
have some conversation. We would love to get on the same page. I'd say another step, the climate, the gigantic climate bill that we've been working on for a long time. And this is just an added piece of that. So we want to get on the same page to
Yeah, that
find
bill
out
is
where we
important.
can. Yes, absolutely. And I noted in the information that you spoke about, or, the agency would like to, handle the data. I have no issue with that.
Okay.
It's the goal that we're trying to get to. So I look forward to that. Secondly, when you talk about the staffing piece, you'll hear it from us. We want to be a partner. We said it before. And if they're the numbers you're needing, it's great to hear that the administration gave you 14 more.
14.
And you said you need to get to 30. We're your partner. So we can work. We want to work with you to get you to that point as we move forward. Some of us here, Senator Salling, in his part of the world, the factory and where we're at Ferry Point Atlantic, we just extended. We're going to outgrow there. We got rid of the sunset date, but we're going to continue the outgrow. Your agency has played a tremendous role in making sure that that is a sound piece of property so that we can continue to economically develop for the state of Maryland.
Okay.
I say that to say, the other folks that sit on this committee, we represent areas that need that same attention.
Okay.
We're not only talking about the bay or the river, but we're talking about areas where we have pollutant plants that are getting ready to be decommissioned. We certainly need to have conversations about what does that really mean for the state of Maryland and I know your agency is not the only one that we're talking need to deal with, and we are talking to others. But what does that really mean for us to be able to ensure that we are environmentally sound in these areas because these healthcare challenges that we continue to have are real. And as we continue to grow, the state of Maryland grew in the last 10 years. We're over 7 million people now and documented, right? So we're probably a lot more than that. But at the end of the day, we just need to make sure that we understand the process that needs to be taken when a chalk point getting ready to be decommissioned. What does that mean? Are we corking, the stacks, or is there something that we can work on together from an aesthetically acceptable site to what happens to that, and being able to develop in those areas of our state. And I touched 3 counties, and we have that issue going forward. But primarily, I want to talk to you about 743 as we move forward. So I will rest on that.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I have a couple, Senator Sullivan, would you mind if I do a few and then you do a few? Okay. Madam Secretary, thank you for sitting down yesterday. We had a great conversation about vacancy rates, your approach to filling those and with what you need, zombie permit strategy. And yes, let's continue now that we have new budgetary powers over here. We would love to work with you. Senator Jackson hit the nail on the head. We all view your agency very much as a public health agency. So we need to know what you need, and we're going to help where we can to get you there. Just so I understand the zombie permit issue, what progress do you think you can make with these 14 new positions this year? Do you think you could fill the 90 or so that you have remaining? I understand that the full 30 you need will be not just to address backlog, but also to ensure it doesn't happen again.
Right.
What can we expect from the 14 positions you're going to receive in this budget?
Lee, why don't you answer that? I want to give you the real answer.
Sure. Good afternoon. Thank you. For the record, Lee Curry, Director of Water and Science Administration.
Sorry. No.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. With the additional 14 positions, let me back up. We were able to issue 92 out of the 240 some permits this past year. And we didn't pick just the easy ones. We picked the hard ones, and it's a mix. So we can expect to have probably a similar pace next year. I think with an additional 14, we're almost doubling, but we're not going to be able to finish the remainder.
Okay.
Maybe we get another, what's going to happen? We get maybe we increase what we did last year by about 50%, just to put a number out there. I don't know exactly what it is yet, but one of the challenges we're facing right now is when we start to issue the new ones, other permits are expiring. So we're really not able to gain a lot of ground without the full 30, but I think we will, we will make a significant dent in that.
Madam Secretary, thank you for giving me your target vacancy rate by which we can hold you to next year. Similarly, where would you like to be in terms of for lack of a better term, because it's a nice term, zombie permits? What measure should we hold you to this time next year?
Let's see. That's a very good question to put on the record. So we're at 91. How many more do we have?
We have 145 more.
With 14 FTEs, we can commit to another 91.
Okay, we appreciate that. Okay, Senator Stalling, you want to start with yours?
Sure. I want to elaborate a little bit on the good senator, what he said, because I appreciate your department that has worked with Trade Point Atlantic, and also some of the departments that works with the wastewater treatment plant. We know the release points there We also have release points that are all the way at Trade Point Atlantic, and they have 3 points of release points, but they do tests there also. And we appreciate, but more than anything, you working with Trade Point. I think it's a good example for something I believe you can and Trade Point can work together through the state, in the state of Maryland, and other places and maybe other counties, that you can use that as an example, because we've come a long way. And I appreciate that. And we will continue on, and this will be an ongoing thing, and it makes me happy.
Oh, good.
But just saying that, looking into the 102 regular positions and contractor positions that are there, but also looking into the 69 positions, which it was stated that they were for 9 for climate change, 35 for water and science. So when another more 24 that's going to be added, and then the land and material were 8 and 2 that were added. Are these going to be a permanent positions that we're continuing going on, or temporary, or a position that you would say that you would have for a period of time and saying they would just exhaust itself?
Yeah, they're going to be permanent positions. And before I finish, I did not introduce my wonderful deputy, Suzanne Dorsey. She's the deputy at MDE. So sorry about that, Suzanne. But those are permanent positions.
All right, because I know with all those positions that I know we've talked about this more than once and how important, and it's exhausting. We say it every time that it's so hard.
Yeah.
I'll keep on saying it. We'll do all that we can, and I know the chair we'll do all we can to get those positions filled and try to help out any way we can. Because I've seen, and it's ongoing, and I don't know when it's ever going to stop, the job fairs and things that are out there. Right. And we've worked with our local departments in Baltimore County, and I worked with my county executive, and we would go out there to see what more we can do. So we need to work together to fill these positions, and anything we can do, that's what we need to do. And I appreciate that. I want to thank you for that.
I really appreciate that. So thank you for the support. We need it.
And I'm gonna assume that pending, a couple more good budget years, we're gonna want to reward success. So the more progress you make on backlogs and filling vacancies, the more I think we'll be able to support you in fulfilling your work. I'm gonna bounce back. I'm shocked Senator Salling didn't mention wastewater treatment plants.
I did, but I thought that you were going to go on. I mean, I can go on.
Can I combine two questions? Because I'm going to anticipate your question.
Combination any way you want.
Okay, and we might need Lee to come back up here, but Madam Secretary, we spoke about this yesterday about increased monitoring and frankly, more thorough monitoring at our wastewater treatment plants, particularly the larger ones. Can you speak to your plan there and also your plan in addressing PFAS? I know you're personally passionate about PFAS as I am. Can you speak to us a little bit about your plans, both in monitoring and enforcement, and also about PFAS monitoring?
Sure. Suzanne, you want to speak about the PFAS, and then Lee, you can come up and speak.
Yeah, well, we can,
Okay, or
we
you
can
can do both.
yeah, I'll start with PFAS, and if you really want to get down into the technical, we have Director Curry. So the bottom line with PFAS is that under Secretary McElwain's leadership, we're not waiting for the EPA. We're moving forward to protect Marylanders using the best science, using funding and partnerships to get the job done. So just some high level points that we want to make. We are testing water systems throughout the state and have already taken action when necessary. Again, even without EPA regulations. We are working very closely in partnership with local governments because that's how we'll get the job done. We're using science to understand the risks and then to communicate effectively those risks. And that communication, again, relies on that relationship with local governments, outreach and public information. And we're reducing the risks with funding, regulations, and of course, partnerships. So that's the high level aspect of our PFAS. Happy to go into detail.
I think the last piece of detail I'm curious about is testing of both effluent and biosolids.
Right. So we're talking wastewater treatment plant, and we are testing effluent, both effluent and biosolids.
All three.
Yeah, we're collecting information as we speak. And again, carefully communicating that so as not to be, to scare the public, but to give accurate, useful information that can be acted on very quickly.
Okay. I know we all appreciate your leadership on that, Senator Selling.
I could follow up on that because I know going to the plant and the wastewater treatment plant and Essex and just seeing some of the result and how the changes have come about and how we would love to see that ongoing. I just want to make sure that we are always ahead of this.
Right.
Our county executive and the mayor are working together. We have bills that we want to work together. We want to work with the state. We want to work with our partners to make sure we're doing the right thing. We don't fall back. And it's those release points and where everything ends and it goes right into our back river. It goes right into other areas. We just want to make sure that we don't fall back. And we don't, and our maintenance was I believe was a very serious issue.
Right.
And some of the things for the upkeep, the preventive maintenance that we've talked about, some of the things for the upkeep. We talked about these things, but I just want to make sure that the reports and the assessments that are made, that everybody's a part of that. Because if we're not a part of that and we don't know, we can fall back. And I don't think anybody wants that. So not just at my wastewater treatment plant in my backyard, but I think every wastewater treatment plant, every place that has types of waters and stories, whatever are out there, we just want to make sure that we're progressing and not regressing and being in a place where we can just we're being responsible. And these departments are working with us. It's so important because it was at a critical point at one time. We just don't want that to happen again now.
I totally understand that, and I am committed to it as well. We're building partnerships, as you know. I plan to continue that. We also have several new ways of monitoring in advance. We have it's an early detection system that we have where we're looking at data. It comes in on a monthly basis and we're analyzing it so we can quickly see what's, pollution and nutrients and all of those things. And at that point, we will communicate back very quickly and rapidly and say, this is an issue. Where are we? We'll send them a letter. So that's one of the ways that we're able to monitor and be ahead of it. We're also looking at the operations and maintenance budget. We have been providing funding. One incentive we give them to tell us what's going on early is if they do not, we can't help them with funding. And so we're using that as not leverage, but it's incentive. Thank you.
Yes.
Incentive to keep us posted because we want to help and want to ensure that this does not happen again.
And I just want to say, we know that when the opportunity comes that you're more than welcome to go to the wastewater treatment plant. I promised you, I will welcome you there.
You did.
We as budget tax went there and visited, and I appreciate our chair and the chair here being a part of that. But it would be a great opportunity to making sure that the maintenance is up to par and see how well this facility can run.
That's right.
And when it's up, as it should be in the billions, and that's B, has been invested in this plant and how as it should run. And I would love to go to the point where it's definitely going to be there, and then we can say this has been a success, and that's why we're working together.
And I so appreciate that. And I will just end with it unless you want to add something, but it operated before very well. So it's right. So it's a matter of going back to where it should be.
Yes.
So there's some promise there.
Yes. Thank you.
Quickly on similar on a water issue, thank you to your staff. I know we're all very appreciative of this new partnership between your staff and the legislature and the dialogue we're having back and forth about legislation.
Yes.
I have a bill on living shorelines. It's deeply important to my community. So I'm going to ask before we put the budget to bed that if we can work together on the waiver issue for living shorelines, I would greatly appreciate that.
Absolutely.
And Madam Secretary, I want to give you an opportunity to comment, appreciating that it is a pending legal issue but I want to give you the opportunity to comment on the Conowingo settlement. Appreciating there's only so much you can say publicly, but wanted to give you that opportunity.
Yes, Conowingo, we're, as you know, the permit was vacated, invalidated, and we have an opportunity to look at what we can do going forward to make sure that we're protecting health. I can't say too much. You want to add anything on that?
No,
But yeah,
the settlement is still in effect.
It is, but we just need to, we're working with this whole issue. Okay. You're welcome.
We appreciate that. Senator Jackson.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Secretary, pretty quickly, we would love to walk with you through the challenges of local county well and septic issues. I can tell you, being a representative of Southern Prince George's County, Northeastern Charles County, and 75% of Calvert County, that is a heavy workload for us. And to work with your local health departments, Department of Environment, and others. So we would love to walk with you because it affects us all more and more every day. And lastly, I don't know if if the question or if this was posed the last time you were here, the chair has been asking agencies about your own personal salary schedule. Do you have that in your agency? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Well, we don't, yeah, not yours, but for your agency. There are a few agencies who have that luxury. We're just wondering, because onboarding is always an issue. So you have, every agency has its own expertise. And regardless of how you knock down your having run an agency, regardless of how quickly you can hire someone, there's still a true onboarding process and a training and getting folks up to speed process. And so as we challenge you on your vacancies,
Okay.
which we will, we want to know, how we can help you, and maybe the salary schedule is something you may want to think about. So
I
I'll
wish
leave
we
it there.
did have that flexibility. That would be great. I don't think we do. We would love to have it.
A few more questions, Madam Secretary, on the fee structure, appreciating Andrew's observation that it's probably time that we revisit it in terms of and as appropriators, anytime we can bring more money in to help balance the budget, we're going to appreciate that. Do you have a timeline for your thought process there? And I'm assuming you might need some sort of action on the General Assembly side for a number of those fees. So
Yes, we would. Yes, I wish I could just make it happen, but we will need your support. It's urgent. And I've said this to my leaders, it's urgent. So we plan within the next couple of weeks, we're going to do an analysis on starting to think about which areas we should prioritize. There's so many different fees. And so we can't do it all at one time, but we will prioritize and keep you posted.
I'd appreciate that. And perhaps if we can maybe work, however you want to divide or triage.
Okay.
But if we could get some feedback on your recommendations by, let's say, October, would that be appropriate? And that way that gives us enough time to think about legislation?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Maybe it doesn't have to be every fee. I don't know how many you have, assuming it's quite a bit, but if we could triage and get us some feedback, we'd appreciate that.
Yeah, we have quite a bit.
Okay.
So yes, I think that timeline will work for us.
Okay.
Thank
And
you.
final questions from another member. Does MDE have a way to track how counties are preparing for recycling market development to meet state goals, and specifically whether their tipping fees are enough to cover future infrastructure needs?
I'm going to turn it over to Tyler. Introduce yourself first.
Tyler Abbott, Director of the Land and Materials Administration here at the Maryland Department of the Environment. So we do have a way to track, what's going on in the counties. Every 10 years, the counties review and revise their, plan for dealing with solid waste. And then every year, they also submit information to us on, what the current status of recycling is and solid waste is in their county. We don't have, I think as maybe fine detailed information is being looked at. I know that there are also multiple bills that are looking at addressing, recycling in many different ways. So I think that's probably information we will be having here soon. But obviously, as the Department of the Environment, we love data. So I think that'll be helpful.
On a similar note, permit tracking and modernization of permit tracking systems. Shockingly, we don't have any IT issues that Andrew flagged for us. That seems that we have issues in every other department that we monitor, but curious about your plans for modernizing that system.
Yeah, let's take.
Oh, sure. We have upgraded, as of last year, all the administrations have upgraded to our environmental tracking system. So there's still some gaps in that system, but we are, as you've seen through OpenMDE, working very hard to get data visualization. The secretary has already prioritized data-driven decision-making, but also having those dashboard tools that help us and our constituents know where they are in the process.
It is a part of being transparent and having data quickly. There's no reason why we shouldn't. So yes, thank you for that.
We appreciate that. And Senator Hester appreciates that as well. So I want to deliver that. Seeing no further questions, again, we appreciate that you inherited a lot of the challenges on your plate. We are your partners in solving them and appreciate your straightforward approach to the challenges we all face. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
We have one individual of the public signed up to testify, Miss Betsy Nicholas from Potomac Riverkeeper Network. Betsy, we have 2.5 minutes.
I will do my best. Thank you. I also submitted some written testimony that's about 4 pages long, so it'll have a little more detail than what we go over right here. I just wanted to, Betsy Nicholas, Potomac Riverkeeper Network, most recently, before that though, I spent 10 years with Waterkeepers Chesapeake. And so first I wanted to comment a little bit about Conowingo Dam. We were the successful litigants on that case at the Federal Court of Appeals. The settlement, whether or not it exists, it no longer has any relevance to a federal permit license or any conditions in that. So it no longer governs from a legal perspective anything that actually has to do with the water quality certification issued back in 2018 or the work that's going to go forward. I know that MDE has to separately settle that issue with Exelon, now Constellation Energy, but just wanted to kind of clarify that. Happy to talk Conowingo more anytime you would like. I wanted to talk a little bit about a couple things that came up here. One being the open data portal. That's a great step forward. And as you know, Senator, it was in response to a bill that you passed, but it's still missing most of the relevant data. So there are no documents attached. Enforcement, settlement agreements, consent decrees are simply not there. We also have, I think these are very much inherited problems and an issue with the previous administration, as well as a lack of staffing with MDE. But I would say as an organization that's often working on behalf of community members, we still have a lot of difficulty getting information back from the department. I was just at a hearing in Charles County earlier this week where consent decrees that were a result of information from my organization apparently have been entered, and we're trying to get them from the polluter because we were never informed, even though we gave the data to MDE. We can't get it online. It's just sort of this revolving wheel that's a little bit frustrating. I also wanted to mention fees came up. Strongly support increasing the fees, but also fines. Right now, the fines are limited to only $10,000. In federal court, under the Clean Water Act, you've got about $39,000 per violation per day, but it's much, much more. And considering that goes directly to the salary and staffing issues, I think that's something to consider. And just in closing, I want to thank this committee, MDE, for putting in to get these new positions. I think we're going to be in a completely new world on this in a couple of years, and really look forward to trying to help work with MDE and this committee to address issues.
Thank you very much. We always appreciate public input. We're also joined by our Chair of Budget and Tax, Senator Guzoni, if he has any input on this questions for the budget. Okay. Seeing no further questions, Madam Chair, Madam Secretary, thank you to the MD staff, especially for staying late on a Friday. Committee, we are back in this room. We have Monday off and we are back here on Thursday, the 2nd, hearing 3 budgets, Office of the Public Defender, Department of State Police, and DPSCS Division of Pretrial Detention and Services. And with that, we